Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have 1, 2, 3, 4 good brothers. We have, making his GeekWatch debut, and technically his monastery debut, our resident doctor of punishment, Dr. Novell.
The doctor is in.
We have the man guiding you through all of your VTubers with a pair of red sunglasses, good brother John.
Always good to be here, my friend.
we have our resident cosplayer and coming in with the steel chair, good brother Slick Rick. Who is currently muted.
Never without a botch.
Oh. And
He's like, I love that.
The man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadari Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix.
Zadari Enterprises would like to remind you that infamy and fame go hand in hand, and however you achieve greatness, make sure you leave your mark on everything. I do it with the blood of our R&D.
Yeah. But speaking of greatness and infamy, that brings us to this particular matter. Since you guys know I love me some contrast, it's always a reliable thing to utilize, and especially when it comes to people attempting their own comeback or revival story. And it's for that reason that we have the topic name that we do for this one. Game design is in the eye of the beholder, because, well, we're dealing with both Inafune and Igarashi.
They even have the same initials, K on it.
Yeah. And I could have gone with that, but that would have made people think of Killer Instinct, so I decided not to.
Yeah, probably for the best.
I wonder if the kanji if their name starts out the same.
No. No, it does not.
Not even close.
Darn it.
No. Oh. It would have been funny if it did, but
It would have been surreal if it did.
mm-hmm. Mostly because that's something that doesn't happen all that often. But for this one, I think we'll end up getting into Inafune a bit later, but I do want to start with Igarashi and his hat. I think he's trying to out Terry Pratchett when it comes to hats.
I don't know if he's trying to out Terry Pratchett. I think he picked up the cowboy hat because of the whip monk. I honestly think that might be it.
Well, from what I've heard, the reason why whips were even a thing with the Castlevania games was the influence of Indiana Jones.
Yes.
But I mean, honestly, at that time, let's face it, who wasn't being influenced by Indiana Jones?
Well, at least we have someone with a cowboy hat in this kind of field that's actually talented, unlike somebody I know.
Who? JBL? Okay, that's
I was thinking more Dave Filoni,
You only brought that name up because you just showed up recently, didn't you?
Yeah, and I have to rub it in the fact that he got his ass kicked by Joey Styles.
That story will never get old.
No, and he doesn't do himself any favors because he is unfortunately that kind of Texan.
Oh boy.
You know, the one who has no volume switch.
Everything's bigger in Texas, including your fucking voice.
I know Van Damme had said that he had considered having him play Pick a Hand because he just could not deal with how loud he was all the time. And when you're when you're on the road with somebody for days at a time and they're acting like that, yeah, I can understand being on your last nerve.
This is where I have to say a old joke I have with some of my cosplay buddies. He who has the biggest voice potentially has the smallest thing down below.
Yeah, but
Some people just have naturally loud voices, though.
But as far
You mean the
as-
diaphragm?
Yeah. I mean, I will not dispute the whole Dave Filoni thing. If anything, he's revealed himself to be a hack, and believe me, his day will come in the temple.
One day.
Like, it may not be today, it may not be next week, it may not be next month, but it will happen. But
Until then, accept this justice as a gift on the day we roast other developers.
But when it comes to Igarashi, or simply referred to as Iga in all English caps, I don't know if he's ever explained why he did that.
I don't think he has. I think he just likes it. Because it wasn't him who initially christened him that. It was the West.
Yeah. I can see that.
I think he's the one who made it all caps. But everybody over in the West was just calling him Iga. Because it was easier.
I'd also imagine it's one of those things like, say, Suda Goichi calling himself Suda 51.
Yeah, it's a moniker that everybody knows. I mean, it's also a pun when it comes to Suda 51 because Goichi means 5-1 if you're looking at it in numbers.
Yeah,
that's not necessarily what the kanji are. I mean, Ichi I think is, but that's different.
You have a similar thing with the mangaka known as Oh Great.
Yep.
It is a pun off of his name because remember, Japanese wordplay.
It's fun.
But as far as the final thing I'll say about the hat is that it's just as possible that Iga is a Westaboo, which are a lot more of a thing than people realize.
I've seen it. It's an entirely different concept, but than what we expect it to be, but it's a thing.
I think Iga appreciates the West because he understands that a lot of his fan base came from the West.
Yeah.
Especially Symphony of the Night was something on the PlayStation, which was, we'd already had some big movers on the PlayStation, and then Symphony of the Night comes in and people are like, oh, this is a Castlevania game that's never been like other Castlevanias, because before that, Castlevania was a stage-based action platformer, and now it's this exploration-based action RPG. 2D action RPG, but still an action RPG.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously because of Symphony of the Night and the Super Metroid games, that's where we got the portmanteau Metroidvania.
I know some people have been trying to push the term search action, but it's not going to stick.
That search action...
Yeah, no.
At the time that the term Metroidvania organically grew, unlike the inorganic growth of the term JRPG, but we've been over that. There are videos about that.
Mm-hmm.
The big search action games were only Metroid games and Castlevania.
Yeah.
So it grew naturally out of that, and everybody just it's evocative. You know exactly what it's referring to, what gameplay loop you're going to be looking at, and so. It works. It is an organically grown term that communicates exactly what it needs to.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, the closest thing you could come up with, and this is a stretch. I will say it because I'm making a point that it's kind of hard to define a Metroidvania outside of calling it that. You could say explorative platformer, but even then, there's a lot of games that are considered Metroidvanias that don't fit into that explorative platformer mentality, and that could go on to any other kind of games that have that kind of same thing. There's no set of genres that specifically fit that exact type of gameplay loop.
Yep.
It's a and it really was exemplified. Like, it was crystallized at a cultural zeitgeist by Symphony of the Night, for sure.
And I think part of the thing is that trying to get search action to stick right now, it would be like trying to get Wolfendoom to stick for first-person shooters at this point. We're too ingrained with the terminology that it'd be like trying to rebrand Twitter to X or something. Oh, wait.
Oh, wait.
Oh, wait, everybody still calls it Twitter? I wonder why.
I've considered
like
doing the meme of you still call it Twitter out in the name of some grandstanding. I call it Twitter because I'm a lazy bastard. We are not the same.
Oh, I call it. Yeah, it's like it's not like the place was bought by a millionaire who was sick of someone like keeping tabs on where he traveled or anything. No, not at all.
But
Among other stupid reasons.
getting back on the rails. Oh, you had mentioned before it went live, but Iga's earliest work was being involved with the Gradius series, which
I would actually say that it's technically Titana Twinbee.
Mhm.
But yes, Gradius 2 as well.
Yeah, but you could certainly it's interesting that one gets brought up, since the most famous part of Gradius is its upgrade system. And while you're not going to see a direct correlation between that and what he would do with Castlevania, there is some smattering of DNA in that.
He was specifically the programmer for the PC Engine version, we should note.
Mm-hmm. Because PC Engine had far more of an impact over in Asia and Europe than in the States, which is why a lot of PC Engine stuff didn't come stateside.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say it really only started to come stateside once reliable emulation was becoming a thing. But obviously, the big thing that he's going to be known for is his contribution to Castlevania. Trying to remember which one was his first entry where he was involved.
Technically, Rondo of Blood. He's listed in the special thanks for Rondo of Blood. I don't know if that means he had a large impact on it, but the first one that he had a huge impact on is Symphony of the Night, as assistant director, programmer, and scenario writer.
And,
also,
Well,
good.
side note, Iga, Iga's a badass, and the reason I say this before we even get into all of the acclaims and accords he rightfully deserves for his influence in Konami is the fact that this guy plays Pong and Crazy Climber and decides to teach himself BASIC. For anyone who's a programmer in the audience, I can feel you cringing from here. And assembly. He taught himself assembly. For those who don't know what assembly is the language that takes the ones and zeros of turning on and off the circuit inside the physical PCB and starts turning it into calculations. It's the first step of transformation from just straight electric impulse into actual computer. It is complex, it is contextual, it changes based on what hardware you're using. And he taught himself assembly.
Yeah.
Fucking crazy.
I honestly would have liked to find out more about the company that he originally got an offer from, Graphica, because I can't find anything on them. Because he that was the place that originally offered him a job when he was at university, which he turned down, and then he got an offer from Konami, which he accepted, of course.
well, there's probably a reason why we haven't heard of Graphica before, because probably they weren't going to be a very good company, and I think he saw the writing on the wall.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when I tried looking them up, I get this Jigsaw art project, which I'm pretty sure had nothing to do with them. But apparently, his wife had also worked on Rondo of Blood, and they had a collaborative relationship on the matter between that and between writing for Tokimeki Memorial. But what is kind of amusing regarding Symphony of the Night is that it was a fight to even get that thing made, because there was, I think, I'm trying to remember if this if this was because around the time, if I recall correctly, Castlevania 64 was in development, and it was believed that was the direction that things were going to go, because this was the 90s and everybody was in an arms race when it came to 3D.
Yeah, I get this has been well documented that even Capcom had this exact same problem where they wanted any games on the PlayStation to be 3D because they wanted to be cool and hip with the new tech.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of developers were like, no, we want to keep this one 2D because that works better that way and it'll make a better game and it'll sell better.
There's also the fact that I'd imagine a lot of developers didn't like the idea of having to learn whole new swaths of programming for something that was so untested.
Yeah.
Untested. Not to mention, we also don't have to keep this in mind. When we also don't know where they would be at the time in terms of development. Because imagine you're like, okay, we're almost done, most likely like 95% there, and then you say, no, scrap it. I want it all 3D.
Yeah, because that always goes so well. I mean, you think back to the games of that era, and like which games that made the jump to 3D worked and which ones didn't, and you could see that the ones that really succeeded were ones from people who wanted it to push the boundaries, who wanted to see what they could do with it. Final Fantasy VII would probably be your best example. They already knew what they wanted to do with 3D technology. And that's why they jumped to the PlayStation, because, well, they were going to provide them what they needed. But if you look at games that were utter failures, you look at companies who were just trying to jump on the bandwagon and didn't have any idea what the fuck they were doing. Hi, Bubsy 3D. How the fuck you doing?
How's that Gold X Award treat?
I was thinking that exact same one.
John, I owe you a beer. I was literally about to say, hi, Bugsy. How are you?
We're sharing brain cells here, people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like...
Superman 64.
Yeah, oh, God. Yeah, there's another one. There's another one.
Although, with that one, they were screwed from the get-go because DC was doing everything in their power to get in their own damn way.
Wow, it sounds like they haven't changed in, 30 years?
Pretty much. Yeah, you like, the more you learn about that game, the more pity you actually have for the developers at Titus, because they were trying, but they were just shot down at every turn.
And I have played that build version of the PS1 port that got leaked a while back. It's actually better. Like the PS1 version that was being developed, I think by Blue Sky, was not as infamously shitty, and it didn't even have those fucking rings.
Oh, you actually got to play Superman with less limitation? Huh. I imagine why that's more fun.
Then again, it's Blue Sky Software, who keep in mind their pedigree was stuff like some hard ass game nobody heard of called Vector Man.
I honestly never heard of that, but then again, I'll be honest, I started getting into it after that generation.
Well, I love Vector Man, but it does not love me back.
Yes. As soon as played Vector Man, I can attest to this.
Mm-hmm. Also, hello there, Coops.
What up, Coops?
How's Graham?
Yep.
But,
She's
okay.
Yeah, even Mario in the YouTube chat. DC getting in its own way? Must be at the end of the day that ends in Y.
Mm-hmm. But I think he ended up having the last laugh in the end because, well, Castlevania 64 became the running joke for years on end, and Symphony of the Night became the legendary result that we ended up getting.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't get a good 3D Castlevania until the PS2 games.
Mm-hmm. Although I do think Curse of Darkness gets more shit than it deserves. I remember people hating it, and I suspect part of it is the fact that the same year that came out, Capcom put out Chaos Legion, which is similar on paper.
Yeah. As someone who's played Curse of Darkness, I mean, it's got flaws, to be fair. It's not a perfect game, but it was playable. It was fun. It had its moments.
Mm-hmm. I think this is more of a timing issue, because you look at you look at Chaos Legion on paper, and it's doing a similar gimmick, but it was significantly more polished.
I imagine, at the very least, Curse of Darkness was probably better than Mega Man X7.
It's not exactly a high bar to cross. Let's be fair here.
Burn to the ground!
Oh my god!
I have heard that some people have been trying to make a mod to fix that and X8. In fact, the X8 version is a demake.
X8 wasn't a bad game though.
No, X8 wasn't bad. I mean, it was back to 2.5D or at least 2D, in that regard, and it had some good moments, and it had a good voice cast. I mean, they got most of the G Gundam cast for that game, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, I think it was more of the damage was done.
Does that mean Zero's hand is burning red? Its loud roar tells.
Well,
no. The problem is it wasn't Zero. It was X, because X was voiced by Tomon.
Was Mark off the X?
Also,
Yes.
Day of Sigma.
For both that and he was X in both 8 and Maverick Hunter X.
And Command Mission. Command Mission as well.
Oh, yeah.
There's also the Day of Sigma animation that came bundled with Maverick Hunter X, which has him do the shining finger maneuver. So there's that.
I mean, if you're gonna get him in for it, you may as well go all the way with it.
And one last note before we get back on the rails here. Not only is Domon's voice actor playing X, freaking in 8, I don't think it carried over into the other games, but in 8, Sigma was voiced by freaking Master Asia.
Oh boy.
I also know apparently there's one entry from Iga's tenure that apparently was not well received in Japan, but I'd still want to take a look at it if I ever got the chance, if by some miracle it ever got translated. And that is Elder Gate, which he made in 2000.
Well, he was the director there.
Yeah, apparently it did not do well in Japan. And hello there, Rai Rai.
He's going to continue to call her that. She can't hear it, so he's fine.
Well, I've said it in text, so I'm gonna do what I want.
Oh! She called you Millie.
Yeah, I can do if I think I had a record of Big Willie style in my library at one point. So, full circle.
I just have to know, are you from Philly?
No.
Damn it.
I don't complain enough to be from Philly.
Fair.
But as far as why Elder Gate didn't turn out well, I can't say, because there's not a whole lot of detail on the game. And from what I just know that on Famitsu it got a 22 out of 40, which is not good. That's the equivalent of getting like a 5.
So,
but from what little I was able to see of it, it looked like a standard turn-based RPG. I didn't see a whole lot that would make me think, oh, this is bad. I've certainly seen worse RPGs on the early PS1. I think it's more that Elder Gate came out in 2000. It already had some very stiff competition for PS1 RPGs by that point, and it felt like something that would have better come out in like 1996.
It has the same, from what I'm looking at, it has the same aesthetic as, say, or at least the same graphic design. Well, not necessarily same art direction as FF9. So 1999, 2000 is right around the time when all of these types of games would have been coming out.
Yeah, so I just know that he claimed that he wanted to make a game that could be played at any time and feel fresh. And I think we can, in that regard, we have something in that direction nowadays in the form of the myriad of roguelike games, which are very pick up and play and are offering a varied experience every time you do a run.
Also, for Eldergate, it looks like Igarashi once again tapped into his eternal partnership with Yamane. She's responsible for the OST.
There's two people that are always going to be associated with him. Yamane and Ayami Kojima.
Yamane.
Yeah, Yamane. Yeah. And Ayami Kojima, who pretty much became the signature artist for a lot of Castlevania work.
Yep.
Basically, she became to Castlevania what Amano was to Final Fantasy, or what Toriyama was to Dragon Quest. Okay, maybe the last one's a little bit inaccurate because Toriyama was there with Dragon Quest at day one. The whole idea was to do something for one of the Jump affiliated magazines that they could promote.
Yeah.
And that and as far as apparently he had stated that he had said his favorite is Symphony of the Night, but he's also given praise to Aria of Sorrow because of the changes that it introduced. And there were a handful of other things that he did. Apparently he part of the reason that he left in 2014 was because he felt that his focus on console games made it that he couldn't really adapt to the more social game approach with mobile games, because right around this time, that was where Konami's business model shifted, and he wasn't the only one who got ran out because of that. That's part of the reason Kojima got ran out of the company, even though in that case, it was far more dramatic
and egregious. They did a lot more wrong to Kojima because he stuck around for a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we say mobile games, but the other thing they were focusing on at that time was pachinko machines.
Yeah, the new laws that came in a couple years ago kind of fucked that plan.
That's part of the reason why SNK... It's funny that around the same time that Konami was trying to get into pachinko machines wholesale, SNK, who had been dipping into that business for a few years at that time, was getting out.
Because they saw the writing on the wall and that eventually legislation would come in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, of course, then shortly afterwards, they got new ownership, and that new ownership was far more interested in games being made than anything else. That was also around the time the Playmore part of SNK was dropped.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, as well, there were plans in 2008 to do a Castlevania game starring Alucard, but according to him, development didn't go well, and it got dropped in favor of the project that Mercury Steam was working on. And even he had noted he felt that Mercury Steam's project looked better than what he was doing.
He's humble about it. That's the thing.
Now, after he left Konami, he didn't do a lot at first. I think he was more busy just setting up a business and deciding where they were going to go with Artplay.
Yeah, he was. apparently he tried to find a publisher for a console project, but it didn't pan out.
Mm-hmm.
And he has cited for his art play studio that one of the big reasons he decided to try crowdsourcing was his was seeing Inafune doing the whole Mighty Number 9 thing.
Yeah.
Which,
And this was before Mighty Number 9 released, so people weren't as skittish about. I mean, there was other bombs, but nothing as disdainful as Mighty Number 9. So people were less averse to crowdsourcing.
There's also a couple items that he's been given special thanks on that I did want to comment on. Now, Order of Shadows was a Java mobile game, so not much to talk about that. But he's also gotten special thanks credits on the Castlevania arcade game, just Castlevania the Arcade, which I recently found out from Video Game Esoterica, who's a phenomenal channel, I will add, that there are some people trying to make a reverse-engineered PC port of it. Which is certainly a bold move, since it was using a kind of proprietary motion control to simulate the whip, as well as sub-weapons. You point and shoot for sub-weapons, and you swing the thing to do the whip.
Mm-hmm.
Though it did do one interesting thing in that obviously you can whip candles to get hearts, but the more you do that, the darker the room's gonna get. Which doesn't sound like much, but that ends up making a whole new change to how things are done. But there's a lot of stuff that he was involved with that he was primarily a producer, and when it comes to producer in video game development, it's a little bit unclear how much of an impact they have compared to a director or a programmer.
It depends on the producer, actually. Unlike how producers have become somewhat standardized in film and TV, how hands-on a producer is in video games varies from producer to producer. It's much more a tailor-made sort of experience. And it's usually done by people who have some experience with the business already. You don't move to producer immediately, at least back then. I don't know about now.
Mm-hmm.
But because back then he'd had experience with the process, he'd been a programmer, he'd been a director, he'd been a writer. So he started moving into production as well. And producers, they can influence an entire project if they need to. It's the reason that in some cases where you get a producer like Ika or a producer like Yoshi P. I mean, that's what the P in Yoshi P stands for, people. It's producer. You get these guys who look at the project, see everything in the large picture that needs to be fixed, goes to each of the smaller segments, determines what's needed there and who can best address it, and then they start shifting things around so that these things can be addressed and fixed. Or, in the case of a new game, who has the best skills to do what? So, there's definitely a more hands-on approach to producing in video games in Japan, at the very least. I don't know about here in the West.
Yeah, and obviously when I think of producer, I think of producer in terms of film, and over the last 50 years, the creative input that the producer has had has been overshadowed by the creative input that the director has when it comes to film. And in the case of television, the one who has the biggest creative input is the writer, as opposed to the director or the producer. I mean, that's not to say they have no impact, but it's a matter of degree.
Well, the writer has the most impact in how a story is told. The director has the most impact in how that story is going to look. And in general, in film and TV today, the producer is in mostly in charge of funding and marketing.
I can certainly see that. I will also note the other one that he had a special thanks on was, of all things, R-Type Final 2, which I have in my library. It is actually really, really damn good. I'm surprised that he got a special thanks on that. Because R-Type is not a I don't think R-Type was ever published by Konami. It's always been IREM's project. Mostly because why would they publish it when they had their own side-scrolling shooter?
If I had to guess, the special thanks in R-Type Final 2 is likely one of those special thanks you give to somebody who inspired you. Because Iga, as we mentioned before, programmed on Greatest 2.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, that's just a guess on my end, though. You'd have to ask the actual developers why he's got his special links on there.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember there was a PlayStation 1 game where a lot of Naughty Dog employees helped out with creating the game for an entirely different company, but it was only because they were in the same building as this other company for this game. Like, that's the only thing I can think of. Like, he helped them give like tips or something, maybe some issues with other in certain aspects, and that's why he got it. But that's
Maybe.
just my speculation.
Maybe. I mean, R-Type Final 2 is Grinzella, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm. But it is an interesting affair, and it's another reason why I have so much love for the side-scrolling shmup. Like, several of the people here can attest that and twin-stick shooters are my catnip.
He loves twin-stick shooters.
Mm.
It isn't surprising. Twin-stick shooters are fun.
Yeah. Sometimes they don't love me back, like, say, Total Carnage.
And sometimes they are the most genius twin-stick shooters ever designed, like Beat Hazard.
Yeah.
A game whose difficulty changes based on the music I choose as my BGM? Fuck yes.
And that's gotten good enough to get 2 sequels. I know some people will try and hang the fact that it was a producer on Castlevania Judgment over his head. I think if it wasn't for motion controls, Judgment would have gotten better reception.
It was
completely better.
It was an okay 3D fighter, but it wasn't exactly the greatest. But it wasn't shit either. It could have been worse.
I do think this is another case where timing becomes a factor, because consider who they got to do character designs for it. Takeshi Obata.
Yep. I'd like to point out that it wasn't even Konami programming the thing. The developers were aiding.
Aiding is okay as a studio. I mean, they've certainly got a good body of work, but I'd hesitate to say that they're a studio that set the world on fire. They were a AA studio at that time.
They still are to this day.
Yeah.
I mean, for those who want to know what games Aiding and also what its previous name Rising developed, you have things like back when they were Rising, Bloody Roar. Everybody loved Bloody Roar.
Mm-hmm.
And
Bloody
also,
Roar.
yeah, and also Armed Police Batrider, which is funny. But then, as Aiding, they've done the Clash of Ninja games, the Naruto Clash of Ninja games that were
Still a fucking classic.
Mm-hmm. They did Bleach Heat the Soul, They did some of the Zoids games. They did Inuyasha Feudal Combat.
I believe
They
they're
did a
also
lot of-
responsible for Fate Unlimited Codes.
Let me check real quick. I don't see that credited here. Oh, there it is. Now I found it. It was in the middle of all the other stuff.
Mhm.
However, they also did a game that I love to death. Tatsunoko versus Capcom.
Oh my god. Ugh.
That game is fucking glorious. And they've done, in more recent years, appealing to literally all of us here, they did a bunch of the Batride War for Kamen Rider games.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I'm aware.
So
They also helped with Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate and Pikmin 3 and 4.
Just to be technical, I didn't play the first one that you mentioned. Should appeal to all of us here.
Bloody Roar.
he's
Play
referring to
Pikmin 3 and
Batride.
4, though.
Oh,
Oh.
that's right. I forget that Doc is a novice in the Tokusatsu game.
Yeah.
It's okay. We'll
all
turn
start
you into a
somewhere.
toku nut sometime.
Mhm.
Just giving you a hard time.
When it comes to Judgment, like I said, the motion controls thing didn't exactly help. The fact that they had Obata right around the time that Death Note was at the height of its popularity certainly did not help, and the design direction that he was given didn't help either. A lot of the design choices were just bizarre. But I think a lot of people were grading it the way you would grade a standard fighting game like Street Fighter or King of Fighters instead of a party fighter, which is what it is. Like the contemporary shouldn't be Street Fighter. It should be Power Stone.
Smash. It is Power Stone. It was compared to Power Stone by a lot, actually.
Mm-hmm. Although I will not defend the art style changes because I'm not going to say that Ayami Kojima's art style wouldn't work in 3D. I think it could work, but it would need to be filtered through another artist. Much in the same way that Amano's art style, even nowadays, I'm not sure could work in 3D.
It again, filtered through another artist, it actually works quite well.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of stuff in as a side note here, there's a lot of stuff in Stranger of Paradise that definitely looks Amano inspired and then turned into 3D.
Well, the Dissidia games were, even though Nomura was the designer there, the attempt was to try and do a middle ground between his more manga style and the style of Amano. That's why I say with a filter it could have worked. But you look at some of the character designs in Judgment and they look so removed from Ayami's designs that they're almost completely different characters.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, personality-wise, they very much were. I think that's one of the bigger things that killed Judgment.
Mm-hmm. But it was after Ego left and set up Artplay that early in 2015, a little website was found by people who were on the troll for Castlevania news. A little website called swordorwhip.com, which had a pixelated, stylized Ego dressed up as Dracula sitting on his throne with his glass of wine, and you had to choose sword or whip. Choose your weapon, Vampire Hunter. I, of course, chose whip because I ain't no busta. And when you choose the weapon, he goes through a little animation of throwing down the glass because, of course, he does, because everybody references that moment in Symphony of Night.
Of course.
And he gets up and congratulates you for choosing your weapon, and then he gives you a redirect, which at the time it wasn't a redirect that was obvious. It's just like click again and be redirected, and then you were redirected to egavania.com, which was the redirect link for his Kickstarter page. And me, being one of those people who was an early discoverer of this page, like the day it came out, literally 30 minutes after it came out, I saw it, and I went, I must have this game. And I immediately backed. They were funded in like the first hour.
Yeah.
And back then, that was a big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, how many other projects do we know of that were funded in less than an hour?
A lot more than you think.
A lot more than you think, but a lot less than back then than now.
Oh yeah.
And so, this new game, this spiritual successor to Castlevania Symphony of the Night, described as an Igavania, which has its definition on the Kickstarter page. I will actually go there and read that out. Hold on.
What is the definition? A Metroidvania made by Iga?
Igavania, noun, a gothic exploration-focused action platformer designed by one of the godfathers of the genre.
So
there's-
basically, yes, but with that little extra blurb about it being gothic.
Yes. This was an immediate back for me. Absolutely. I took it. I was like, I want to play the pretty lady with stained glass tattoos. That'd be cool.
And this also got like major attention from other YouTubers because they actually had certain YouTubers who could, if you backed them under a certain name, you could get special perks.
They got teams and everything. We had this huge social media campaign that unlocked more stretch goals.
Yeah. I do remember one of the things with the initial pitch video of him seemingly quoting one of his former higher ups about how there was no money in a 2D Castlevania, and he stands up, throws the glass, and goes, "I will prove them wrong." And I have a sneaking suspicion that there was a kernel of truth in that part of the reason that he wanted to do Bloodstained was to showcase that even in the current market there was a demand for this kind of game. Plus, this was after, I can't remember if this was after Lords of Shadow 2 or the like, but this was around that time when Konami wasn't doing anything with the Castlevania series.
This would have been after Lords of Shadow 2 because this was May 2015. Now, for anyone who's already played Bloodstained or has seen it or watched a Let's Play or any of that, I would always encourage you to go back and look at this Kickstarter because some of the concept art they have is amazing, and you get the sense of where their priorities went during development, and you can see that they tried to keep the soul of what we saw on the Kickstarter all the way into the game. You'll also see some stuff that is technically no longer true, and Iga was very, very apologetic about it. Like the fact that he had promised that it would be on the Wii U and the PS Vita. But by the time the game was finally finished and out,
Those are defunct.
those were dead consoles. And so he profusely apologized, especially as development was taking longer and longer, for the fact that certain things that were promised could not be kept. And the fans were grateful. Like, they realized he wanted to make these things and give these things, give these things to the people who wanted them. And so the people who had ordered like PS Vita and Wii U editions were some of them were just like, hey, change it to a different platform for me. Others asked for refunds, and he honored the requests. It was a very fun time, and this was also one where he promised a physical edition, and people did get those physical editions.
Yeah.
There were tons of stretch goals, and I like they did stretch goals like they wanted 500,000 USD. In the end, they reached over 5 million.
Like
Before
Didn't they had to add more stuff to it because they realized how much they were good?
Yes, they started with a bunch of stretch goals and a bunch of mini stretch goals, and then they had to unlock the basement with the social stretch goals, and they went into the basement with even more stretch goals. And then they had to make up one final stretch goal because they hit over 5,500,000. And the stretch goals start as, hey, we're funded, we get art books, there's going to be a second playable character, a higher difficulty. At $850,000, they got voice acting David Hayter, who voices the main antagonist, Jeeble.
No.
Oh, no, he was supposed to voice
Zangetsu.
Zangetsu.
He was supposed to voice Jeeble initially, though. That was the thing about that. Of course, they also got Robbie back to play the librarian.
Robert Belgrande, voice, which, very nice nod there to pull that move off. It's like, and Robert Belgrande was one of the better voice actors from Symphony of the Night, so to have him back, and
I mean, he was Alucard, so
yeah. And like the librarian was Alucard. Let's call it.
Yes, it's Alucard in disguise. Yes,
And
nice subtle nod there. I loved it.
If I'm being honest, he's always been very open about doing these sort of dumb projects, because for a while he was doing the vampire gimmick on the press start shorts.
Yep. But as they went on, he added cheat codes as there are cheat codes in the game because we reached that stretch goal. He put in couch co-op, local co-op, and then a bunch of different game modes, a new boss, speed runs, boss rushes, a retro level, and a classic mode, which eventually became their own games. Hello, Curse of the Moon and Classic 2. Yeah. And then these mini goals of changing a bunch of the music to 8-bit music. That was fun. But afterwards, when we got to the basement, biggest map, biggest castle, the Wii U port, asynchronous online multiplayer, the PS Vita port, orchestrated tracks, online challenge mode, a third playable character. We actually got way more than that. I think we're at 6 playable characters, including the crossover stuff. Playing the princess from Child of Light in Bloodstained is it's so different, and I love it. And here's where this is where the prequel minigame, the actual retro level turns into a game thing, happened. A roguelike dungeon mode, and then finally boss revenge mode. And you had all these social media achievements that were used to unlock things, like how many backers there were, how many Twitter followers and retweets there were for the social media account, how many YouTube subscribers, Tumblr followers. Yes, this was back when Tumblr was still relevant. Facebook likes. This was also back when Facebook was still relevant. YouTube views, Tumblr notes, Instagram photos, overall Vines, back when Vine was a thing. Fan art, comics, challenges, just crazy amounts of interaction. And what these achievements did is unlock bonus stuff, like you get all backers get a desktop and mobile wallpaper, or get to see the next few stretch goals or mini stretch goals in the stretch goals list, or we're going to make physical merch for these other achievements, things of that nature. And then, of course, to open the basement at all, we had to get 30 of the achievements, unlock the dungeon level stretch goals. And then the final one, at 60 achievements, Miriam Pure Costume. Miriam will have an alternate magic crystal-free costume in the game, which is pretty good. Also, we unlocked New Game Plus. Oh, and Iga cosplaying.
Yeah.
But the people they partnered with, first they had the 6 clans, the 6 weapon clans. The Bullwhip, the Broadsword, the Cat o' Nine Tails, the Rapier, the Iron Flail, and the Katana. They had 2 community clans, the Dungeon Clan and Operation Akumajo Clan. But the people they partnered with back at this time And please remember, this is back in 2015, so this is before some of them became shit and sucked. But we had Proton John, Chugga Conroy, Nintendo Capri Sun, Steven Plays. We had Alpha Omega Sin, who has unfortunately fallen off the face of the earth, I swear to God. We had Mega 64. We had Ego Raptor and the Game Grumps before they sucked. There was this widespread thing. Ego was a fucking genius, or whoever helped him make these decisions was a fucking genius. And that proves that he surrounded himself with people who had good ideas and could do things he couldn't. He knew that he had limitations.
And more importantly, I think he also surrounded himself, like, he's like, okay, if we're going to do this Kickstarter, he probably talked with people who knew how to use Kickstarter and knew how to do social media campaigns to make sure it's like, okay, I want to make sure this game gets all the attention it can so that so people will back it and it will sell. I want this to work. We'll focus on making a good game. You guys focus on promoting it in every way you can to get it out there. And my God, did he hire the right fucking people?
Absolutely.
What is more important on this, and this is going to be a theme to manifest later on, is even with all of this, the only thing that was really promised was just this game and as much of that game as they could do with what they were given.
Yeah.
No side materials. Nobody even knew that Curse of the Moon was going to be a thing until
the stretch goal.
Until the stretch goals, and by then there was so much momentum for everything, and more importantly, the focus was still on Ritual of the Night. There was no comic book adaptation. There was no animated series being planned. It was just the game.
I would like to point out, Monk, that one of the things that I think sold a lot of their $250 plus packages was this. Guest artist Yoshitaka Amano. The artist, illustrator, and character designer famous among classic video game fans for his distinctively detailed, filigree to Final Fantasy character designs. Amano will be creating an exclusive poster for $250 plus collector's editions in a Sumi-A style.
Oh, that can certainly help.
You know, I'm sure people saw that and went, I get Amano poster? Okay. But the people, and what you were talking about, John, with people who knew how to campaign, that was Fangamer when they first partnered with Fangamer, and Fangamer Design helped them set everything up for this. And then, of course, as they got further and further out and got more and more people, more and more of the stretch goals, and needed more and more things touched upon, they partnered with other people, such as DDM for partner sourcing and coordination. Two Player Productions were the people who made their pitch video. Armature were the people that they were engaging for the Wii U port that unfortunately could not come to pass, and Rocket Sound was for all the English voices in the game. Besides, of course, Robbie Belgrade and David Hayter. And yeah, I was right. On the Kickstarter page, it still says David Hayter was supposed to be Jeeble.
All right, so, but I think they made the right call switching it out, because I think he does he fits perfectly as Zangetsu.
Zangetsu is great. I love Zangetsu.
Yes.
And the better thing is that Zangetsu actually gets to return, so there's that.
That's also true. I mean...
If you play Curse of the Moon, you know what we're talking about.
I actually need to see if anybody purchased this.
Yeah. While you do that, that's the thing. It's a case of Egan knew he could not do all of this on his own. He was one man. He knew what he was good at. But he's like, okay, I can do this. So let me find. He probably did his homework. He's like, okay, who's good at this? I want to do this thing. Who's good at this thing? Okay, they're good at this thing. I'm going to ask them to do that thing so that I can focus on doing this thing where I know I'm going to be able to, where I know I'm going to work. Instead of trying to do everything himself, he brought in people and companies who were good at the thing he needed them to do.
Yeah. He reached out to the people he knew could help him best. He surrounded himself with competent people. And that's the hallmark of a good leader.
Yeah.
Whatever type of leader you may be, whether you're a CEO or a director or whatever. It is a hallmark of a good leader that they recognize their own shortcomings, what they need to shore up, what they need to make better, and how to find the talent in order to do so. Because he knew he was never going to be able to do this all by himself. And that even proved itself throughout development. There was a point where he was, anyone who was following the campaign, including myself, he was showing that, gameplay footage and development videos. And at one point, there was a part where even on the Steam page for the game, because he had listed it up there so people could wishlist it and such, had these very scathing comments. But they were not scathing in, oh, you suck, fuck off. They were, why does this look so bad compared to other video? And things of that nature. And there was a point during development where he... Oh, where is that trailer?
You're referring to when he overhauled the graphics.
The entire graphics engine, yes.
To play devil's advocate when it comes to that graphics engine, I believe they were using Unity. Like, a lot of indie devs were using Unity before the company responsible for Unity decided to be fucking idiots.
Yeah, and eventually he showed this overhaul. I'm pretty sure they went over to Unreal after that.
They could have. The big reason Unity was used a lot was because it was very low cost.
Yeah. And he did this, like, just this video showing old and new, which was the Bloodstained Ritual of the Night release date announcement.
Mm-hmm.
And showed some of the old and new stuff in it that was really funny. He was like, yes, I deserved the criticism you gave me. Yes, it helped me make a better game. Please, so long as you continue to give me good criticism, I can continue to make a good game. And everything he did during this development phase that was keeping so transparent and just absorbing all of the feedback was all to his benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Iga did almost everything he could right.
Yeah.
And anything he couldn't, the people around him did right.
Exactly.
Nah.
And so with Iga's legend there, and I am going to call it a legend, he's set himself up as someone who can be trusted to make a good game and to take feedback and criticism when they're necessary and valid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that a few years afterwards he did some character art for a project called Revolve 8 Episodic Dueling. But since that game is a mobile affair, I'm not touching it. Although who knows, maybe there's something of note with it since it was a production alongside Sega. But I don't count that as something in his tenure because he just handled some concept art. If I'm being honest, it looks kind of like a gacha game.
Well, if it's a mobile game, it almost certainly is, because that's 99.9% of mobile games these days.
But one other interesting bit of oddities on his record was Ultimedia's Excellent, which is technically a Gradius spin-off. And in fact, right on the cover, they have to put inspired by the legendary Gradius series. Basically, it's like Ultimedius is basically if someone wanted to do Gradius but add waifus. That is the best way for me to describe it.
Run that by me again.
Radius add waifus, Coops.
You had him at waifus. Let's be honest. Second, someone
I
says
think
waifus.
he's gonna go look this game up now.
Well, it is on 360. I don't know if it was ever ported anywhere else. So there is that. So there is that.
You think he cares? He just wants to look at the waifus.
Well, I mean, this is based off of the original Otomedius, which was, again, waifus plus Gradius, even back in, 2007. Well, but Otomedius Excellence was, I guess, basically a sequel to the Otomedius Gorgeous.
Yeah.
If only I was at my Xbox Series X right now, I'd definitely look it up on the shop.
Although even with that, I look at that kind of thing as just going full circle with his particular roots. I will also note the Adventure Rebirth, which for the longest time was locked away on WiiWare. It's basically a remake of the Adventure, and it's gotten a new shot at life recently. Our buddy Alm, the other person who tortures me with puns, had covered it on one of his streams a while back, and it's not that bad. But I think if there's anything to take away from the success of Bloodstained, it was one, that transparency, and two, to make a Star Wars reference, stay on target.
Stay on target and take your time. He wasn't going to rush anything, which is why he eventually had to make some of the hard decisions and announcements that he did, which was like, hey, sorry, we can't develop this for the Wii U or the Vita anymore. Although they did put it on the Switch.
Yeah.
As a follow-up instead.
But seeing as how the Switch port performed, I think it's probably for the best it doesn't go to Vita.
But no, this goes back to the old Miyamoto saying, a delayed game is eventually good. A rush game is bad forever.
Yeah.
And that whole
counter argument, No Man's Sky.
No Man's Sky wasn't when Miyamoto made the quote, there was no such thing as patching your games. I think no, and also while we have a GeekWatch planned for that later, right, Monk?
Yeah.
That was actually my idea, by the way, people. Just so you know.
I hadn't thought of that.
The idea of a game that came out bad eventually redeeming itself is infinitely harder, especially considering that most game studios either couldn't, as in don't have the ability to, or wouldn't because they're short-sighted, do what Hello Games did for free. But that's another story for a different GeekWatch.
Yeah, and if you listen close, you can hear the cries of millions of No Man's Sky fans begging Hello Games to let their wallets be opened.
Yeah, I can hear the voices of a million people willing to donate money. Or no, wait, this is more suitable for the Rorschach one. And the teeming masses will look up at me and beg, "Please, Hello Games, let us pay you." And I will look down at them and whisper, "No."
You're getting another free update, and you're gonna like it.
or we could always do the "It's time for your 4 o'clock free update, honey." Yes, ma'am. Yeah, or no, yes, Sean.
Yep. But that whole
we will get into that in a different one.
That whole stay on target thing is as excellent of a segue as we will have when it comes to Inafune, who certainly has a much longer tenure, going all the way back to 1987, all the way back to the original Street Fighter as a graphic designer, which I feel terrible for anyone who goes back and plays the original Street Fighter and just how stiff that thing was. The fact that that became an iconic franchise is a miracle in hindsight.
Well, the fact that an iconic franchise isn't just a miracle, Monk. It's due to a glitch-turned feature. Remember, the combo system was not intended, but they kept it because it was more fun.
That wasn't until 2.
Yes.
That wasn't a ton. We're talking the original Street Fighter was so.
Well, I was
bad.
talking about from the series. The series' success is due to that glitch in 2.
Yeah, but the
That
fact
was my
we got
point.
that- but you know, when you think about Capcom, a lot of their early games had that same problem where their first games were really bad, and it was a miracle that a second game happened. But that second game ended up catapulting the franchise into the stratosphere because both Street Fighter and Mega Man had that exact same thing happen.
Mega Man was not a bad game, though.
The first Mega
No,
Man was not
but-
bad at all. Just wasn't as
No,
good
but here's
as 2.
the thing: the story with Mega Man is that the first game was not well received, and Capcom was ready to shelve the series there, but the creators, Inafune included, said, "Just let us try one more time," and they gave him a shot by making it in between other projects, and then Mega Man 2 happened, and well, the rest is history.
Yeah. And
Remember that Quick Man stage is just bullshit, though.
yes, no argument there.
Yeah, and I still want whoever pitched the Yellow Devil concept to be flogged in public.
Why? The Yellow Devil's easy to defeat, Monk. Just shoot a multi-hit weapon at it, and as soon as it hits the eye, pause, and then it's dead.
Yeah,
In the first game.
it's not an issue of hard; it's an issue of tedium. For the same reason I hate Emerald Weapon more than Ruby Weapon.
Because you have to have less than 9 materia, or you just die.
Oh, that, and even when you do fight it, it's just a long slog like a Viking death march. But
No, Monk. That's fine.
Mhm.
I understand.
And obviously, Inafune has tried to downplay the whole Father of Mega Man title, but gradually started to have it beat into him. Oh.
Well, I mean, in the original Mega Man, he is the character designer, sure. Which literally makes him the father of what the character looks like. At least one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of other people working on Mega Man, too.
Yeah.
So he's right to have denied it for as long as he did.
But he's another one who started out as a designer and then shifted into being a producer for a large amount of his stuff, and a lot of times executive producer.
Yeah. Executive producers are even worse than normal producers because they get to meddle even more.
Mm-hmm. And one of the obviously this covers some of the stuff with Street Fighter, some of the stuff with Mega Man, as well as the X and Battle Network series, and eventually Star Force. But in the mid 2000s, when the 7th generation started coming in, he started being very critical of the Japanese game development scene around that time, saying the whole thing was over, especially with the advent of the Xbox 360's success. And he was one of the major forces pushing for that appeal to the West kind of approach. And in hindsight, a lot of while Dead Rising was one of the successes that came out of that push, it's also a case, like, I liken it to the to what people say about the new generation of the WWF. Yes, guys like Bret Hart and Yokozuna made their mark around that time, but for every one of those, you had a dozen or so Bastion Boogers.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, Bastion Booger.
Or
And that's
Mantar.
kind of what we saw with this westernization of Japanese gaming. Yeah, you had your Dead Risings, but you also had your Bionic Commandos, and I don't mean rearmed.
Yeah, you also had stuff like Dark Void, which I wanted to like more than I did, and the demake is I I know some people will bring up Resident Evil 4, but he was only involved with the PS2 port of that, and Resident Evil 4 was something that was in some degree of development hell for the better part of a decade. Or, in one case, one of the things that would have become Resident Evil 4 ended up starting the chain of events that would lead to Devil May Cry.
And yet both Resident Evil 4 and Devil May Cry 1 are fantastic games.
Mm-hmm. But the point still stands on that. And it's more... There was also the Lost Planet series, which... Well, the first 2 games were pretty good. But the big problem was, in this attempt to appeal to the West, you had a very cargo cult thinking around that time.
I'd like to point out that the first 2 games are pretty good in Lost Planet, Monk,
Mm-hmm.
because they're still designed by Japanese people. Lost Planet 3 was developed by Spark Unlimited, which is not a Japanese company. And it kind of shows that they didn't understand the series they were getting into.
I know some people will bring up Dead Rising being developed by what was rechristened Capcom Vancouver, but they still had oversight on the matter.
Yeah, Dead Rising is a series, formerly known, formerly from Blue Castle Games,
Mm-hmm.
and now known as Capcom Game Studio Vancouver. It's like you said, Capcom still has oversight. Capcom can still give them series Bibles and all that fun stuff, and they are much more likely to take it seriously because, well, that's coming from their boss.
Mm-hmm.
You must use this. Whereas with Lost Planet 3, it was, hey, here's the series Bible, and I don't think they got it.
Yeah. Now, as far as what led him to leave Capcom, we've never gotten a full answer as to why, but I've always suspected that he was used as the fall guy when a lot of that attempt at a Western expansion didn't pan out.
I mean, if he was the one that spearheaded it, then yeah, it would make sense that he would end up taking the fall when it flopped.
Especially given all the shit that he was talking about the games industry at that time.
Well, let's be honest, Monk. Some of the shit he was talking was valid.
Yeah.
Because in the interview he had with 4Gamer when he was announcing that he was leaving Capcom in 2010, something he said was, the reason why I'm quitting is basically because I think the game industry itself must change the way it goes about making games. And then, of course, he said that some of the problems with Japanese game companies at that time were the fact that people were getting complacent and that there was an emphasis on spectacle rather than workmanship, like big budgets, big staff, but no focus. So some of the things he said were valid criticisms, because they're things we still criticize all game developers for today. Mm-hmm. A focus on spectacle over workmanship is always a losing proposition.
I do think his defense of Phil Fish back in 2012 is kind of hilarious in hindsight.
Yeah, that was definitely a gaffe on his part, especially considering that Phil Fish is a trust fund baby who is still living off his trust fund and being a shitty DJ now.
Well, you guys know why Phil Fish quit video game development and canceled a sequel to Fez?
Because people kept making fun of him.
It was specifically because one guy called him a tosspot. Jonathan Blow, who watched that indie games documentary on a podcast, had said, some of you were fine, one of you looked like a complete tosspot, and called him a fucking hipster. His words. This resulted in a whole tweet storm and him announcing that he was canceling Fez 2.
He also took all that money with him.
Mm-hmm.
All the money from the crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Just took it and ran. Like a
That
dick.
was a time, I swear.
There's a whole video that could be made about the interesting time frame in which video game developers tried to jump on the Kickstarter bandwagon in 2014. Because while some of them did very well for themselves, unfortunately, the infamy ones are going to carry the stink for the longest time. And if you think that something that happened a decade ago can't still carry that stink, let me remind you all that one of the big reasons why it took so long for anyone to try doing Judge Dredd again was because of the damage that the Stallone movie did. And also, in pandering to most of you here, let me remind you that that's also the reason why it took 13 years for us to get another, not 13 years, but about that, for us to get another full-on series when it came to Kamen Rider because of one joke.
Yep.
We've covered that. We've covered the whole Kamen no Rider thing in the past. I still would like to see someone do a translation into English of that, just for history's sake.
Just for shits and giggles.
Yeah, and make a good cringe watch for a lot of us. But
Yeah, that would be a perfect riff.
yeah, but it's one of the but one particular failure with a massive amount of stink can have a ripple effect that can be felt for years. Or in some cases can produce the wrong idea within popular consciousness. I suppose if I had to use an example of this kind of thing, consider the whole vision as movement thing when it comes to a T-Rex, which has since fallen out of favor, but a lot of people are still going to think that because of the impact of Jurassic Park. So these things can have that kind of effect. And I suppose if I'd use another example, that really, really bad attempt at a King Kong remake in the 70s. And after that went down, and after its sequel stunk the joint up even worse, nobody touched King Kong for years afterwards until Peter Jackson came along.
Yeah.
But now when it came to the state of Japanese gaming in the 2010s, it would be easy to say that things were in a starry state. But if I'm being honest, the entirety of game development in the 7th generation was in a sorry state because of an economic bubble bursting, and the fact that everybody was scrambling to adapt to this whole HD tech. A lot of things changed a lot of fast, and not everybody could keep up. That's always been my theory on the matter. And if there was any real victim of the 7th generation, it was the AA market. It's only in the last 5 or so years that we've started to get that back.
I will say one AA thrived in the 7th generation.
What?
The same AA that's been thriving since the 90s, Monk, From Software.
Yeah. I do think doing a deep dive on FromSoft's pre-Souls work is worth exploring, though not Armored Core, because I'd want to save Armored Core for its own episode or just its own segment.
And you pandering to me there, all of us. Who doesn't like giant robots here? If you say so, I will point at you and call you a liar.
Yeah, but it's the perfect excuse for me to talk about stuff like Otogi or Ninja Blade or Murakumo.
Or King's Field.
True. And with King's Field, we have a successor in the form of Lunacid.
But the point is that some of the criticisms he laid down were valid. Sure, some of them were just stupidity following a trend he thought would probably sell more games for wherever he was. But, sometimes people... Oh, wait, no, hold on. Animals die for food. People die for wealth.
Yeah.
Anyone who doesn't get that, read more Wuxia.
But obviously, in 2010, he set up Concept, also in Osaka, which is a bit amusing since that's where Capcom is headquartered.
No, I'm sure that wasn't intentional.
Yeah. Then a year later, he sets up another company called Intercept in Tokyo, which apparently the idea was Concept would focus on working on multiple games, and Intercept would be an idea factory. Actually, I think I have that backwards. One of them was working on for multiple games. One of them was an idea factory. But trying to develop two companies in the span of 2 years like that, I feel like that's a canary in the coal mine.
I think that Concept was the game developer because I don't remember Intercept being credited with Mighty Number 9, for example.
It wasn't. It was, however, working on Kaio, King of the Pirates, which never came to me.
Never came to be, because Marvelous pulled out, and apparently they lost almost $4 million on the project.
Yeah. The concept for Kaio, King of Pirates didn't sound very good either. Like, I love the Journey to the West, but how the fuck do you base a pirate game on the Journey to the West?
Not to mention, screwing up Journey to the West is a really good way to get half of the damn planet mad at you.
The good thing it was canceled instead. There's no screw up if you don't release a game.
I mean, I cannot understate how much of a big damn deal that is, which is why looking at the people trying to virtue review Black Myth Wukong and getting blown the fuck out about it, I'm not surprised one bit.
That comes out tomorrow, and I can run it. I can install it now. Fuck yes.
Yeah, but I guess he didn't learn his lesson regarding Spark Unlimited because they were one of the people involved with Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z.
I don't think that was his choice, considering Ninja Gaiden Z is Team Ninja's game.
Yeah, it was a collaboration between Concept, Team Ninja, and Spark Unlimited. But
I'm guessing that Spark Unlimited was pulled in by Team Ninja then.
Yeah, I don't know who takes more of the blame. And Yaiba wasn't terrible, but being associated with Ninja Gaiden and the approach that it was going with, it didn't measure up.
It was a good game though. I played it.
Yeah. He argued that part of the reason it didn't sell well was the transition to PS4, and did defend the game. I'm not sure about the it didn't sell well because people were transitioning to the next gen of consoles, because he should know better when it comes to this whole between console thing, given Mega Man and Bass. That was a SNES game when there was already a good amount of movement towards the PS1.
What you mean, Rockman and Forte? I'm sorry, calling that character Bass is sacrilege in my mind. I will never not call him Forte. Fucking Forte and Gospel instead of fucking Bass and Treble. Jesus Christ.
I could make it worse and call him Bass, so I held back.
I mean, if you call him Bass, we are enemies. Mega Man, shut up! I don't need you.
But
yes, back when Ego Raptor was good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Now, Monk,
we must stop Dr. Willy.
Stop Dr. Wywee.
Dr. Wywee. We must spell the evil energy.
Yeah.
Are you sure it's Wiley, not Willy?
No, it's Wowee.
Yeah.
But
it always sounded like Willy to me.
Looking at it, Ninja Gaiden Z was what the involvement of Concept was to conceptualize the game, providing character designs. Essentially, almost all of the programming was Spark Unlimited, and they were brought in by Koei Tecmo and Team Ninja.
So I think even with that, it's still a case of lessons not learned.
Yeah, likely.
Not learned or never learned.
As I know I've made this joke before, but it's akin to someone grabbing milk out of the fridge, opening up and going, "This milk is sour. Maybe tomorrow will be fresh."
Yeah. The big thing is that it was after this that Inafune partnered with Inti Creates for the Kickstarter to, well, the game that Inafune is probably most known for after Mega Man now.
Yep.
Mighty Number Nope.
And
I mean 9. I'm sorry.
when I did the transition, I talked about staying.
Just
on
spell it in
rockets.
German.
Oh, but if I do that, I'll end up thinking of the Mighty Nine from Critical Role, and I'd rather not. Now let's not drag them into this. They don't deserve that.
Mm-hmm.
We got other things we can throw at them negatively.
Yeah, but when it came to the reason to stay on target thing was I bring up is, you know, there was made a whole big deal about the launch. He did the launch at this whole big convention show. There was talk of doing crossovers with other games. I think one of them was that Gunvolt spinoff, not Luminous. It came out around the same
Mighty Gunvolt. You're talking about the one that was a crossover between Mighty Number 9, Gal Gun, and Azure Striker Gunvolt.
Yeah, there was that. There was talk about doing an animated series, and right alongside its development, he decided to launch another Kickstarter for a project called Red Ash, which was intended to be the successor to the canceled Mega Man Legends 3 project.
Yeah. Well, he didn't launch Red Ash until 2 years after the end of the Kickstarter for number 9, or about 2 years.
That is true, but I look at that and I'm reminded of the recent rule that Kickstarter has implemented, where you cannot have more than one crowdfund project running.
Well, like I said, he only had the Kickstarter. He started the Kickstarter for Mighty Number 9 in 2013, and it would have closed in 2013. He didn't start the Kickstarter for Red Ash until 2015.
Yeah. Point I'm getting
The
at.
problem is,
Go ahead.
the problem is Mighty Number 9 had not yet released when the Red Ash Kickstarter had been posted, and so that's the problem. Not to mention the fact that nobody wanted Red Ash because what we wanted was a sequel to a cliffhanger that we never ended up getting. Red Ash does not scratch that itch, ergo, it's not going to be as desirable as, say, a Mega Man like made by the creator of Mega Man, because the classic Mega Man games were all pretty episodic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they were all self-contained. You got the whole plot of that Mega Man game in that Mega Man game.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a case of optics here. It's a case of, well, right now you haven't even released the first game you promised us. How do we even know it's going to be worth it until we see what you're actually able to do on your own?
Actually, I'd like to go one step further. Red Ash was a straw that broke the camel's back. And the reason I say this is because he did the Kickstarter for Mighty Number 9, and then he did like 3 other Kickstarters for Mighty Number 9 related things.
And I'd say all 3 of those things, including the animated series, were things that nobody was asking for.
Exactly. They just wanted the game. If it had been Mighty Number 9, no Kickstarters for 2 years, and then Red Ash, people would say, they wouldn't have said, you've promised us this and we haven't got it. They'd be like, Mighty Number 9 is probably close to finish, so they want to get a head start on their new project. The optics were caused by multiple Kickstarters that, if I remember correctly, not all of them ever released the promised the promised products.
Yeah.
So
Red Ash never became a thing. It was radio silence.
Red Ash failed to reach its goal.
It failed to reach its goal. There was talk about maybe it's still happening, and then it was quietly canceled. I think last year, but it had been radio silent on that for several years. So when the cancellation announcement came, it was like, wait, that was actually still around?
No, there are no cancellation updates. There have been no updates whatsoever since 2015. So it is believed to be canceled, but there's been no cancellation announcement.
Yeah.
But it's unofficially canceled is the best way to put it.
From what now, Capcom certainly had a habit of making a new IP and then trying to make a whole franchise out of it. This was something that they had done quite a few times and to great success. But I think this was an issue of realizing the hard way. You can't really do that. Because you're counting your chickens before they hatch. And moreover, if you're going to try and build a franchise out of the gate out of something, the thing that's the launch pad for that franchise has to be, well, good. And there is one case in point that I can bring up that I have a direct story on. That being the live action Sonic the Hedgehog movie, the first one.
Oh yeah.
Now I've told the story before, but some time ago I had on a woman who was a producer at Sega of America at the time. And when I found out that she was there, I had asked what the perspective on her side of the glass was when that first trailer dropped, because I wanted to know what the company response was. And through that, and I've told you the story before, John. It was revealed that the god-awful design we got there was the result of compromise, because for some reason Paramount wanted something horror-leaning, according to what she told me.
Oh, God.
Whereas Sega wanted something closer to the mark. That was an attempt by the team to try and meet both sides. Obviously, it didn't work, and Sega of Japan was absolutely livid because they wanted to use the movie as a launching off point for doing more stuff with Sonic in the coming years.
Ever heard of the golden mean fallacy?
No.
Basically, it's the fallacy that the center of two opposites is actually what you want. So the fallacy, however, quickly gets turned on its head, where it says Alice wants to kill all puppies, Bob wants to kill no puppies. Obviously, the correct answer is that we kill half the puppies.
Wasn't that part of the story with King Solomon? Both sides can't agree on who gets the baby, so let's cut the baby in half.
Yeah, except in that case, that was obvious. That was meant to be as a method to snuff out, or not snuff out.
Expose the actual character of the people involved.
Yeah, suss out the true mother.
The actual mother, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, it's one of those things where a lot of people will talk. A lot of people who have an activist mindset will talk about the importance of these tangential things, but at the end of the day, you still need to deliver. And if you don't deliver, it's worse than doing nothing. It is not, as the translator had said, better than nothing. And of course, I also have to throw Deep Silver under the bus because don't worry, everybody does it. Because of that god-awful trailer, which they were responsible for since they were the publisher. I remember,
you mean the trailer with all the pizza?
Yeah, I remember one of the heads at Inti Creates was not happy about that trailer.
Well, that's because weren't those placeholder assets that they hadn't taken out yet?
I don't know if that was the case.
The explosions that look like delicious pizza.
It looks like Little Caesar's pizza.
No, it didn't. Little Caesar's pizza has more cheese than that. There's too much sauce for that, Monk.
Yeah, I can attest. I get Little Caesars a lot, thank you.
Okay, let me rephrase it. It looked like Papa John's.
There you go.
You know, the one that people only get because the office orders it?
Yeah. and of course, if you want to talk about that trailer, the prom night joke.
Yeah.
Like, wow, way to talk down to your target audience, dumbass.
Pretty much. And because of that, you had a lot of ill will. Plus, I don't remember if the Kickstarter for Mighty Number 9 was very transparent about how things would actually play.
They started to be, but then they quickly just kind of went silent for a long periods of time, and then occasionally maybe drop an update, which didn't tell us anything.
And I think that certainly didn't help matters, because from what I remember, when people finally played, up until that point, they had no idea how the game was going to work, aside from it being a spiritual successor to Mega Man. Which doesn't exactly tell you a whole lot. Now, people have ripped the game apart in multiple forms, and ripped the events leading up to it and the events afterward. But a lot of people, when they do their ripping into the game, have not spent a lot of time on why the game itself, as a game, was a failure. With one particular exception. I know some people say, well, didn't Chugga Conroy or Some Call Me Johnny or one of those guys cover the way the game played? They did, but not as in depth as I would have liked. But there is one YouTuber or YouTube group that did, and that is Game Soup, who did a multi-part series that they eventually did into a supercut. And I would like to show you all that supercut. And fortunately, I think all you guys are in SyncTube, so you should be able to see it.
Yep.
I would like to, before we go forward, I would like to just note that I feel really bad for Yuri Lowenthal, just because he voiced Beck.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the whole trying to do rock and roll with Beck and Call thing, that actually was not funny in Inafune. Just saying.
I mean, at the very least with rock...
Agree to disagree there.
At the very least with rock and roll, there were a bunch of musical references throughout the franchise.
Especially in the Japanese end, because Proto Man was actually known as blues, and then forte and gospel / bass and treble. Yeah, like even in the Americanization, they learned to there's supposed to be a musical thing. Let's keep that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why they couldn't have just renamed gospel to piano if they couldn't keep that particular phrase in there because of Nintendo's rules at the time.
I don't think I think the reason they didn't keep forte or reference piano is they probably didn't expect people to understand what forte and piano were. But bass and treble, you might.
Yeah, let's remember, these people honestly think that a lot of us Americans are idiots.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the higher-ups of these companies.
Used to. Not so much anymore.
They still kind of do.
Yeah.
They still kind of do.
But not as much.
I mean, that's why they were so... That's why they did the whole anime fan on prom night thing.
Yeah,
no,
but let's
now,
not forget, when it comes to Deep Silver, let's not forget one other thing that they did that's so bad that Deep Silver disappeared off the face of the earth, probably in shame.
I know where he's going with this, but do you all?
Pretty sure I do.
Now, granted, the game in question was developed by Eutechnics, but Deep Silver still published it. So the stink's still on them. But it's one of those cases where where clearly they had a promotion team who had no idea what they were doing. But with that said, let me hit play on this. So let me know if there's any audio issues, guys, and let's see where we go.
Wrong. Well, if you have any idea, let us know in the comments, because we don't know. Okay, thanks for watching. See you next time. $4 million, 3 years, pain development and delays. Launch disaster. It seems that anything that could have gone wrong with Mighty Number 9 did go wrong, from the earliest days of development until the final days leading up to its release, and even after. So where did the $4 million given by Kickstarter backers even go? Development of this game was
forgot
split
Studio
between
4C was
Concept,
involved.
Keiji Inafune's company, and Inti Creates, an 80-person company already
it's
well
not
established in the
working for me.
industry.
Maybe I need to refresh the
Inti
page.
Creates has an extensive
Dude.
resume.
Studio 4C did some of the tie-in stuff, Monk.
Mhm. And all right, that definitely makes sense because Studio 4C is technically an anime studio, but their focus is more on anime scenes for video games.
Yeah, that's why I said they
Am
did
I
some of
supposed
the
to hit
tie-ins.
play on my end?
No.
It should be playing automatically when we hit play because
Yeah.
this is a shared instance.
Mhm.
Is it paused?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Well-received titles such as Mega Man ZX, Mega Man Zero, and Azure Striker.
I'm getting an echo from somebody.
Not me. I'm on push to talk now.
Like
I'm on push to talk to.
My setup doesn't allow it for echo like that.
Can't be anything from me. My
Mm.
headset is different. I don't have the actual speakers, so there'd literally be no way for it to play into a microphone.
yeah, and so I'm trying to figure out who's causing the echo.
Gunvolt. And even if its intentions are good, Mighty Number 9 tries to both adhere rigidly to the classic Mega Man formula and draw focus to its own new mechanics. And the result?
I think it might be on my end, but I'm trying to figure out how that could be.
It is
Yeah, I was
on
gonna
your
say,
end,
'cause-
because I see
yeah,
the
'cause-
circle working around you.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't see anything lighting up when I was looking.
Yeah,
I saw his, but nobody else's.
I gotta drop, guys. I gotta make supper.
No
Okay,
worries, Rick.
peace out, Rick.
Let me see my. So I got it on microphone. I got it on headphones on Discord. So trying to figure out what could cause the problem. Because it seems to be a case where it's playing the audio on two fronts. And I don't remember this being a problem the last time we used SyncTube.
It wasn't. None of us is having that problem.
Is... Okay. Here's the problem. Mighty Number 9 is a game playing an unwinnable and unending tug-of-war with itself, mechanics fighting against each other from start to finish. It's a great study of how classic run-and-shoot gameplay can be continuously marred, blurred, and skewed into a questionable final product. Though, given the huge amount of Kickstarter hype, the association with Keiji Inafune, and the promise of bringing Mega Man gameplay into the current decade, Mighty Number 9 has, in all likelihood, been held under greater scrutiny than it might otherwise have. To try to make some sense of what went wrong, let's examine level design, boss abilities, controls and interface, game flow, and pacing. This is part 1, where we'll take a broad look at just some of the game's mechanics. We'll mostly focus on basic controls and dashing, and how these are tied to level design in the opening minutes of the game. Future installments will go into much more detail regarding level design, boss weapons, visuals, and a lot more. But we'll try to keep these videos fairly bite-sized and compartmentalized, just so it's easier to watch. In this video and other installments of this series, we're going to make extensive use of the concept of flow, shown here.
Flow theory, something I've talked quite a bit about over the years.
You know, I have a feeling that many of the Dark Souls games flow a little up into that frustration area for a lot of people.
It certainly does, but it is still doing the curve, just on a different tier,
On a different axis.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Also, as far as the whole hearing it twice, am I the only one who's hearing that?
Yes.
Yeah,
I only hear it
sounds fine
once.
on my end.
So that sounds like an audio issue on your own computer then, Monk.
Yeah, it's something I'm gonna have to look at. But continuing on.
Here, flow theory says that any challenge in a game should try to be kept proportional to player ability over time, or else the player is likely to be bored if the challenge is too low, or frustrated and angry if the challenge is way too high. We have an entire long-form analysis devoted to exploring the relationship between difficulty level and player flow in video games. You know, I hate to say it, but there's no easy way to analyze Mighty No. 9 without drawing direct comparison to Mega Man, both the classic and X series, but I think this is fair enough for a few reasons.
That brings up another point, the fact that this is supposed to be a successor to Mega Man, but it's dipping into X. Which...
I think that's a little bit of a hair split there, Monk, because X built on what Mega Man had and just expanded on.
You also have to consider the fact that each different Mega Man sub-franchise had its own differences that set it apart from the others. So I don't necessarily mind that it took some inspiration from X. I just mind that what it did take inspiration from, it executed very poorly.
Yeah.
Oh. So, actually, I think I might have a solution. Oh, just need to...
Also, I could see that GameSoup was pandering to their audience by deliberately cutting to the Airman stage for the song.
Yeah, I'm checking some to see if I can figure out why that doubling thing was happening, because I've never had this issue before.
Yep.
So let me go into let me go into settings for a moment. Sorry about having to do this right in the middle of the show.
Second time I get to say, well, actually no, let me say it different. A botch so nice we did it twice. Because this is the second audio botch.
Mm-hmm. So let me see. Okay, let's keep going.
As a self-proclaimed spiritual successor and a modern take on the Mega Man formula by a very well-known industry name, Mighty No. 9 has been presented from the start as borrowing the same basic framework and design principles of Mega Man. And really, it won't make a lot of sense to look at the game in a vacuum anyway, when we know about the very clear standards it attempts to match and even exceed. Mega Man has...
Was anyone even pushing for it to be looked in a vacuum?
No.
Been iterating on these standards for the better part of about 25 years, and all the successes and pitfalls of each iteration have been laid bare for game designers and players alike to witness, with the knowledge of decades of game design behind us.
I love that there's this
Fucking Flash Man.
I just love that there's
And we would
this
expect the developers to do the
this,
same.
montage
As a quick example,
of people
pretend that you're
being
designing
bad
a
at the
stage for a
game.
new Mega Man game, and you have a drop point at the end of a hallway. You can choose to place solid ground on the next screen, so that Mega Man will land safely, or you could place instant death spikes, so that the player is surprised and killed upon landing. I'll give you 2 minutes or so to think about which situation is better, except I won't, because you already know which one is better. Yet, some of my clearest and most frustrating memories of Mighty No. 9 involve such blind jumps leading to deaths. Despite that, more often than not within this particular genre, a blind downward jump typically acts as a transition between screens, not a death pit.
And you do get infinite air dash. You can just keep air dashing in the air. It feels like doesn't really feel like Mischief Makers, but it's just
Oh, wait,
Thanks.
that's just a blind drop?
Yeah.
That is a telltale example of dickish design.
There are okay. So while he's right that there are a ton of blind drops that are screen transition or transitional areas with flat ground beneath them in Mega Man and in Mega Man X and all the Mega Man games, there are some harder levels later in the game, especially when you're in Wily's Castle or Sigma's Fortress, where that blind drop is going to have death on at least one part of it, and there's only a small safe zone. And that's just to test, A, your judgment, and B, your reflexes.
Mm-hmm.
They actually had one of those kinds of drops in the Game Boy Mega Man.
Yes.
Of course, you also get the carry item there, so as long as you've got weapon energy for that thing, you can, if you're fast enough, press that button to keep you from dying, but...
This blind drop was in that first section of levels. Whereas I'm willing to accept one in like Wily's Castle because you're at the home stretch of things.
Yeah.
Presented with the same scenario in a side-scrolling Mario game, you'd be pretty certain that it's a bottomless pit, and you wouldn't jump in. So even though Mario and Mega Man are both 2D side-scrolling platformers, they both have their own respective sub-genre rules about how we should approach blind jumps. And we should logically expect Mighty No. 9 to follow those rules, unless it intends to iterate on them in a meaningful way. If we want to see this interaction on the good old flow meter, we would expect something like this. Wah, wah. So one way to look at Mighty No. 9 is to count its iterations and regressions of its genre, meaning, does it iterate in meaningful and appropriate ways, and if not, are such iterations actually a step back or regression in what we know to be good game design? The blind jumps example we just talked about is probably a regression in my opinion, and I don't think many would disagree. Regression can take almost any form and affect any mechanic in a game. Take the very first stage of Mighty No. 9, which is the highway, eerily reminiscent of Mega Man X's very first.
One pet peeve I have with platformers is when you have whole segments where you have to do them completely perfectly, otherwise you have to do the whole segment again. I had to deal with a lot of that when I was doing my playthrough of Cyber Shadow.
You should probably stop playing Bow Path of the Teal Lotus before you get to the bridge then, Monk.
I will make that judgment call when the time comes. But Cyber Shadow just had some really infamous spots with that during the middle way through.
First stage. The highway in Mega Man X is highly successful at introducing new concepts to the series. Ego Raptor has already done incredible work breaking down the stage and showing how it teaches the player everything they need to know in the first seconds of gameplay.
Again, when Ego Raptor actually knew what he was doing.
In short, Mega Man X's highway is tailored to teach the player about all the mechanics they'll need to succeed. Jumping, wall climbs, charge shots, the whole thing. There are safe hazards that require you to demonstrate basic proficiency with the controls in order to progress. We have platforms that disintegrate if you stand on them for too long. We have valleys with very smartly placed terrain that essentially guarantees the player will discover wall grabbing purely by accident when they attempt to escape an otherwise empty pit. And for the observant player, Zero will show you in a cutscene that holding down the fire button charges your buster. In contrast, Mighty No. 9 takes the beat you over the head approach, by not only stopping the gameplay to crawl through dialogue, but also by explicitly displaying the controls as text prompts. Text-based, game-interrupting tutorials weren't present or even necessary in earlier Mega Man games. Put another way, those developers trust their game enough to let it speak for itself, and they trust you enough to understand what they're trying to tell you through gameplay alone.
Mike, you're heading into a tunnel. It might affect visibility. Be careful.
So just like Mega Man X did, Mighty No. 9 introduces a few new twists to the Mega Man formula, but their overall implementation...
What?
What? Going into a tunnel? It might affect visibility. Oh no!
Congratulations, you just won the No Shit Award.
Aren't you a snuffing robot? Why don't you have night vision?
I mean, my issue with that is it's like Inafune forgot that his players aren't retarded.
is pretty lackluster at best, and detrimental at worst. One quick example is the alternate fire mechanic. There's rarely, if ever, an optimal opportunity to use alternate fire in synergistically constructed level designs. And the best way to learn about alt fire isn't by playing, it's actually by reading about it in the tips menu. Alt fire really just feels like it doesn't have a place in the game. And this is a recurring theme, and arguably the biggest problem with Mighty Number 9. It's as if
When it comes to alt fire in games like this or shooters, I've often been of the opinion that if it's not adding something, you shouldn't put it in, because you're effectively doubling the amount of attacks that you have. Well, if anything,
what did alt fire even do in Mighty Number Nope?
It was essentially a gimmick version of each of the individual weapons. I think it was an attempt to do the kind of alternate fire you have with charging weapons in, say, X. But there's no reason to utilize it, because a lot of them are built on odd angles, or just built in ways that aren't conducive to the gameplay style it's trying to go for.
Mechanics and level design were created by two entirely separate teams. There's almost no synergy between the two, and thus no chance for them to come together to create a cohesive experience. And this kind of obfuscation keeps happening. Throughout the game, you're presented with situations that are less about encouraging discovery through learning or smart level design, and more about just consulting the massive tips menu to understand what you're doing wrong. It's jarring enough that to fully understand how dashing works or how a boss weapon operates, you need to pause the game and dig through the menu until you find a few lines of text that explain it to you. This is a massive detriment to player flow. It takes the player out of the game, both figuratively and literally, and it introduces a superfluous and verbose menu of mechanical tutorials, many of which would be much more easily understood by just showing the player through gameplay. For the best
I know some of us hate revisiting tutorials, but that doesn't mean getting rid of them entirely is going to be much help. You know, the swim damn it problem.
Yeah, but he's right about it being too verbose. Again, Inafune should refer back to what he did in what was done in Mega Man and Mega Man X for this.
Yeah.
When you got a new weapon,
you'd want to integrate.
It would show you the weapon, and it would show X shooting it or Mega Man shooting it on the screen. And then, especially in later X's, you could go into your menu and select one of the weapons and see it being used in a small square in the upper part of the pause menu. You didn't need like this explanation of, oh, it does this, this, and this. If you do these things, it's there on the screen. You see what it does. You already know what buttons do that.
All of these tips into the game, heck, even into the first level, by showing them in action. Mega Man X did just this way back in 1993. And to be fair, Mighty is a bit more complex mechanically, but that just makes it all the more apparent that Mighty's intro stage needed to teach you everything, but fails to really teach you much of anything. This intro stage was the perfect opportunity to recalibrate our expectations of the Mega Man formula, but it ends up being less successful than a game that came out 25 years ago. Arguably, the game's major mechanic is dashing into enemies. In the first stage, you'll learn to dash into weakened enemies to kill them and gain points. Once again, because you're guided by on-screen tutorial prompts. Remember that time that you learned math by watching someone else do it while you never had to lift a finger? Probably not, because humans usually learn through experience rather than passive observation. That learning is what makes us feel good when we solve a puzzle or get past a tricky section of a level.
Why am I being reminded of a theory of fun? Because that is basically the argument that Koster had put forth in that book. That people find fun in games from the act of overcoming obstacles. That's also why when I did my video on Gone Home years ago, I said that the way that Gone Home presents itself does not work. If anything, it shows why those that type of audio log entries fell out of favor.
Yeah.
If the answer is just given to us, then we're probably not internalizing or having as much fun as we could be. Instead of telling us how to absorb enemies by dashing into them, why not let us discover it ourselves? Easy fix. Place a gap that's too large to simply jump across, and have an already weakened enemy waiting on the other side. No matter how many times you fail the jump, you know that there's a way to get there, and 10 seconds of experimentation with your controller will teach you that there is a way to dash, and then your brain will tell you to string a jump into a dash, and then you will observe with your eyeballs that enemies who are in this blue cubey weakened state are destroyed when you dash into them. At the same time, you've taught yourself that large gaps can still be crossed when a standard jump won't do, and that you can chain jumps into dashes. You can probably already think of some unusual
You can figure it out unless you're Dean Takahashi.
Oh, that joke will never get old.
That Cuphead tutorial will haunt his dreams forever.
Yes, yes, it will.
When a fucking I don't know, 5-year-old can figure it out and he couldn't.
Yep.
Even worse, a fucking parrot figured it out.
Yep. Well, let's not forget that a goldfish, and I mean this literally, a goldfish just beat Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. A goldfish.
Or interesting level designs that iterate on this very simple dashing idea. In fact, this example is already partially implemented into the intro stage, but with a fairly important difference. The enemy at the other end of the gap is not weakened. New or cautious players are likely to simply shoot the enemy till he's weakened, then because they're not in any danger, continue shooting until he's destroyed. And finally, they'll just cross the gap like normal. And instead of killing 3 birds with 1 stone by teaching weakened enemies, dash jump chaining, and absorbing enemies, the game presents a situation that's too unfocused to effectively teach the player multiple concepts. This is what a broken tutorial looks like. It's possible for you to skip over these important concepts entirely by accident, and it's not your fault. If the player decides to just shoot the enemy until it's destroyed, then that player has learned an incomplete and misleading set of rules. In fact,
you know what's a good counterexample to this kind of thing with weakened enemies?
What's that?
Glory kills in Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal.
Exactly.
And granted, it is not exactly subtle about it, but it doesn't technically tell you that glory kills are a ideal way to get ammo back.
Just that you can.
Yeah, it's just after you do that and you see a shower of ammo pickups, your brain's going to put 2 and 2 together.
just before this gap section, there's another Force tutorial that has you dash into a weakened enemy, but you're not told why, and there isn't any clear visual feedback. In fact, the dialogue highlights this word, assimilation, to describe dashing into weakened enemies. But unless you read it out in the tips menu, you might not really know why assimilation is even useful. So we've just learned this rule that you should dash into weakened enemies, but the game has failed to provide any real incentive for us to do so. 10% of what? Do I want a low number or a high number? This tutorial is roughly 10 seconds long, but it's incomplete. If this is your first time playing this level, you might pass through this section a little confused. And then you'll come to the gap example we just talked about, which in the end might not tell you a whole lot that you don't already know just by fiddling around with controls. Both of these examples are fully controlled environments, so the dashing mechanic appears to be smoothly integrated into the gameplay. But in practice, using the dash mechanic to destroy enemies usually comes off clunky, and sometimes it makes me rage. For one thing, enemies like to gather in clusters, and unless you're already powered up from assimilation, the standard buster doesn't pierce through enemies. So your options are either to weaken and then dash into each enemy sequentially, which is tedious and boring, or you could tank through the entire section because it's not worth your time. But a first-time player can't possibly know this, and is likely to just dash on through to see what happens. If you dash through the first enemy, you'll collide with the second one, and you'll take some damage while receiving knockback. Of course, repeat this situation over a pit or a set of spikes, and we're nearing NES difficulty. Castlevania, Ninja Gaiden, Mega Man, and countless others employed knockback over bottomless pits to cause instant death for the inexperienced player. Early Mega Man games capitalized on this by placing enemies on or near platforms in such a way that if you're trying to tank through the stage without fighting, you're going to be punished and you're probably going to die. The main idea is, of course, to stand at range and shoot, which luckily is exactly the behavior that this kind of level design is meant to encourage. But with Mighty No. 9, you're trying to remain close to enemies, to combo your dash and power up, because the game has told you that you need to dash into enemies. So you might spend more time near dangerous bottomless pits, where a stray bullet from a secondary enemy could knock you right in. I consider chain dashing to be an interesting concept with broken execution. Enemy placements and level designs don't synergize at all with the ability to continuously dash between enemies to rack up points, and the constant threat of you'll lose points if you don't dash into enemies quickly enough makes for a lot of frustration when you're trying to play defensively at a distance. If you try to use dashing to its fullest, you'll likely end up taking a lot of avoidable damage from enemies and bosses, and right now you might be thinking, nah, he's probably exaggerating. Well, I replayed this first level 5 minutes ago, and even knowing the rules of the game, I was still caught off guard at how poorly the enemies are placed and how difficult it is to have ranged combat. I was even surprised here at this next section where enemies appear from the left, the right, and even the foreground, which led to this.
I don't know, is that splitting hairs, or Is it a case of bad signposting?
I'd say it's a case of bad hitboxing. You shouldn't give it a hitbox till it's fully appeared.
Especially in a 2D game where you need to make clear what's on and off limits.
Yep.
To fix dashing in Mighty Number 9, you would either have to redo the level design or redo the dash system. And I think adjusting the dash system could have been a fairly straightforward fix. Maybe have nearby enemies weaken whenever you successfully dash through an already weakened one, and signify this with a small visual area effect. The AoE range can still be small enough that it works when enemies are lined up in a row, while not trivializing enemies in sequential parts of the level. You could even have the dash cycle refresh on each enemy so that Beck automatically dashes through several enemies without requiring the player to spam the dash button. Maybe you could have Beck rebound off a weakened enemy so that he's closer to his initial position, and you now have enough distance from other enemies to avoid damage. Or we could try forcibly setting Beck's movement speed to 0 upon a successful assimilation, stopping all forward momentum and therefore risk of unintended collisions. I mean, those last two aren't even good examples. They're pretty bad, in fact, but even they would still be an improvement over what Mighty Number 9 already has. Our goal with this video was to take a bird's eye view of some of the most bass-ackwards mechanics in Mighty Number 9. Dashing, weakened enemies, dashing into weakened enemies, platforming, ranged level design, and a Mega Man game based on close quarters combat. All of these are constant and recurring themes throughout the entire game. I mean, we didn't even get to discuss this game's version of the E-Tank. Here's a hint. It's broken as Anyway, we just wanted to highlight the biggest problems in Mighty Number 9, but there is a second staple of the Mega Man formula that has so far been conspicuously absent. With that in mind, the next installment in this series will address boss weapons and boss weaknesses. Here's a hint. They're broken as few have any thoughts on Mighty Number 9? Feel free to share them with us and others in the comments. We actually don't personally know anyone else who's played the game, and we'd love to hear what your experience with the game has been.
Hey, Monk, none of us can pause this.
Welcome back to our analysis.
Wait, what?
I can't pause it or start it.
That is odd.
You have to give us the role, because we're just viewers right now. You have to. There's a role underneath the creator of the room that I had to give you guys.
All right, promote. Let me do, like the whole give DJ thing. In my defense, this is the second time we've used SyncTube.
Because I wanted to jump in with, wait a minute, a Mega Man game with a close combat design? We have 4 of those.
Pretty much.
You want to be technical? We actually have 6 of those.
I mean, ZX and ZXA aren't technically with a close quarters design in mind. It's a mixed quarters design.
But the Zero series was definitely built around close combat.
Yeah, your Buster was more for harassment than anything.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm being completely honest, if you want to count X4, X5, and X6 also was designed around close combat, because those games are not designed to support X at all, but that is another story.
Who's like me, and whenever they start X5, they immediately shoot 0 at the space station.
But it's one of the, in this case, the issue is building your arsenal around ranged combat, but building a strong mechanic around close combat. You know, you have a case where you're trying to play tug of war, as was mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
This of Mighty Number 9. In the last video, we looked at the broad mechanics that make up Mighty Number 9's minute-to-minute gameplay. This time, we'll take a look at boss weapons and boss weaknesses to show that Mighty Number 9 provides an extraordinary example of what not to do. One of the defining characteristics of this genre is that each boss in the game is weak to the signature ability of some other stage's boss.
Good old rock, paper,
Well,
scissors.
except Mega Man 2, where almost every boss, including Metal Man himself, was weak to Metal Blade.
Metal Blade was fucking busted.
Busted nothing. It was fucking broken beyond repair. When, like, even on the harder difficulty, to kill Metal Man with his own weapon only took 2 shots.
Not to mention, it's an 8-way weapon that barely uses up energy.
Once you got it, you basically never used your regular the Mega Buster. You just used the Metal Blade throughout the entire level.
But most of us still love that game anyway. And in practice, it's readily apparent when you've chosen the correct boss weapon. In the classic Mega Man series, you could kill some bosses in 1 or 2 hits from the right weapon. So by looking at the boss health bar, you can pretty much always tell when you picked the right weapon. Or, for example, in the X series, Certain weapons could disable boss behaviors with very obvious tells. For instance, you can remove Armored Armadillo's plating, or you can break off Flame Mammoth's trunk. Either method is fine for informing the player that they made the right decision in weapon selection.
Even beyond that, you hit somebody with the right hit them with the right weapon, and there's a very obvious stun.
Mm-hmm.
Stun locking was a very big thing in some classic Mega Man games and the X series.
Mm-hmm.
Spark Mandrill, anyone?
And while knowing which weapon is the correct one can sometimes be trial and error, it's trial and error that doesn't usually result in a quick or unfair player death, like a blind jump into spikes. Part of the fun of fighting bosses is figuring out which weapon might be the right one. Sometimes it's based on real-world logic, like ice defeating fire or vice versa, and sometimes it's humorously illogical, like the final boss of Mega Man 2 being weak to some bubbles. I mean, some of these...
Yeah, that never made sense to me either.
Actually, it does to me. When you remember what that final boss is, it's basically just a floating robotic orb. It's basically weak. Dr. Riley forgot to waterproof it.
Weapons aren't even weapons, like Woodman's Leaf Shield, which is more utility and defense than straight-up gun. The fact that the developers typically didn't limit boss weapons to this shoots some projectiles and does some damage creates limitless utilitarian synergy with level designs too, not just inside the boss room. For example, you can now have power-ups or secrets that require the long reach of a weapon, like how the boomerang in Mega Man X can grab 1-ups for you, or how you can stand on top of a frost wall to gain some extra height up to a ledge. So we can do cool optional things in our levels when boss weapons have utility. And sometimes the stage itself can clue you into a boss's weakness, which is great for establishing some thematic consistency within levels. Quick Man is weak to Flash Man's Time Stopper ability, and using Time Stopper also helps you survive the yellow Death Beam gauntlet in his stage. In essence, each Mega Man game is a gigantic rock-paper-scissors tournament, and creativity in weapon design can help make each boss and stage unique. We do not see much of this in Mighty No. 9. Mighty stages do very little to capitalize on using boss weapons. In fact, both inside and outside of the boss room, making good use of boss weapons is extremely inefficient for a few major reasons. First, boss health bars now span horizontally across the bottom of the screen, and they're broken into discrete but unmarked sections that, when depleted, will stagger the boss. You can only advance the fight if you dash into the boss while he's staggered or weakened. Take too long...
Only being able to advance by doing the dash thing like that almost makes it into a quick time event.
It is a QTE. It's not almost.
And they quickly regain their health, undoing whatever progress you've made in that section. This already feels terribly frustrating from the flow perspective, shown as little spikes on
prompts.
Say again?
Doc, what was
At
that?
least QuickTime events have prompts.
Oh, yes, that's true.
Yep.
That's true.
challenge meter that soar high into frustrating. Maybe you're struggling just to dodge the boss's attacks, and you're just waiting for a better opportunity to rush forward and dash into them when they suddenly start recovering life. And maybe you feel like bosses shouldn't have the ability to freely regenerate health based on an arbitrary timer that isn't even visible to you, which in my experience encourages you to trade blows recklessly. All of this serves to
As a side note, the whole thing of putting the boss meter at the bottom like that is what I'm reminded of is when the original Mass Effect had your health bar at the bottom corner, and everybody gave BioWare shit for that. I think that's also the reason why you don't really see that all that often in certain action games. Like it's usually going to be at the top instead of the bottom, or someplace where you're already going to be looking instead of someplace where you have to consciously look down.
Well, I can kind of understand why they did it with bosses here. Your character is already very near the bottom of the screen.
Mm-hmm.
I can see peripherally the boss health right now. I can also peripherally see my own.
Yeah. I think the bigger thing is having it be so long.
At that point, I think they were trying to emulate a little bit of Dark Souls because of the popularity of it during the time that the Kickstarter came out.
Possibly. And if that's the case, they kind of missed the point.
Mm-hmm.
constantly remind you that a Pyrrhic victory is at least marginally better than total defeat, and putting yourself in harm's way is at least as important, if not more so, as observing boss patterns from a distance until you're confident enough to fight. Look, I know dashing is the central theme of Mighty Number 9, and I can imagine that the developers were excited to inject this sort of rising-falling action cycle into each boss battle. While bringing a boss to its weakened state can be satisfying, it's not much fun to fight against enemies who don't play fair by nullifying any damage once weakened, and who also quickly regenerate health. And these issues...
So, I know he said something about a Pyrrhic victory being marginally better than a defeat. No, it's not. The definition of a Pyrrhic victory is, by definition, a victory worse than the defeat your opponent suffered because you lost more than they did. That is a Pyrrhic victory.
I thought the definition was a victory that had so much loss on your side that it may as well have just been a straight loss.
Yes, it is a victory where you lost more than the people you defeated. Because you lost more, you didn't win. Most Pyrrhic victories aren't done with the final catastrophic war of or battle of a war. A Pyrrhic victory is usually a battle somewhere in the middle of the war where you've overcommitted your forces and you lost more of your forces than the enemy did in the overall logistics of the war because of this one battle. It's not good for you. You traded too much. So a Pyrrhic victory is, as we're essentially the same thing. It's a victory where because of what you've lost, it might as well be a defeat. Even if the other force was completely wiped out.
Yeah.
So it's not marginally better, it is actually as bad. Or in some cases, worse.
These issues could be easily fixed, which is a real shame and a huge waste of potential. For example, if the boss is always weakened at 75, 50, and 25% health, indicate where those percentages fall on the health bar with a bold vertical line. I mean, it's not impossible to guess roughly where these would be already, but if you know you need to bring the boss to the next segment of the health bar, it would be a huge help to you if you could actually see your exact progress. And there's no gameplay or technical limitation that prevents this. And speaking of ridiculously oversized boss health bars, the boss health bars stretching all the way across the screen, especially on a large display, means that your eyes have to cover that much more distance when you're trying to quickly gauge how much damage you're doing. Look at the boss health bars in any Mega Man game. They're typically about the same size as your health bar.
Yep.
You're already familiar with judging the relative damage of attacks on your health bar, so it's not really a stretch to say that if the boss's health bar were similar, you can easily judge your damage output against bosses. But there's one other thing about those Mega Man health bars: they're divided into segments, so that when you're testing out the damage of multiple boss weapons, you have a concrete unit of measurement to compare them all. This does 1 slice of damage, that one does 2, this one does 4, and so on. I mean, I guess it's possible that this grid design in the health bar is separated into 100 columns, but it fades away on the left end, so you can't even count them with accuracy. Plus, who's gonna sit there and count all the squares when you could just be jumping?
I'd also like to point out that the discrete units that health bars were separated into, especially in the X series early on, was exactly 32. And every weapon did a multiple of 2. 2 to the 0 is 1. Go ahead.
Well, I was also going to point out that practice continued all the way up until Mega Man X4, which they used more of a loading bar almost. Then they brought the units back for Mega Man X8 at least. But,
but they're all always in multiples of 2 for damage done. From 2 to the 0, which equals 1. Anything to the 0 is 1 for those who don't know that. I don't assume that everybody in our audience has done basic algebra. All the way up to there are some weapons that do 2 to the 5. It's not fair.
I still don't know if this grid is actually supposed to convey information to you, or if it's there strictly to be flashy. By the time you actually get to a boss, you might be a little bit low on extra lives, and in the interest of not having to replay an entire stage, you're probably going to want to keep your distance at first to learn the boss's patterns. And the fact that the window for dashing into a weakened boss is very limited really incentivizes the player to stick close to the boss instead of shooting from a distance, which means a lot less time to react to and evade boss attacks. This incentive to stick close to enemies clashes pretty harshly with the philosophy of this entire genre. In summary, we have a combo and dash chain system that heavily incentivizes you to stick close to enemies at all times in a game built on ranged weapons and attacks that can sometimes span the entire display and beyond. The second, and possibly most egregious way that Mighty deviates from the standard boss weakness pattern is that it literally just tells you what weapon to use, sucking out all the trial and error and, by extension, experimentation and discovery from the process. If you possess the weapon a boss is weak to, you'll see a new third option labeled Advice on the level select screen, complete with some more hammy dialogue.
Hurry up and get here already! There's no one to joke around with and I'm so bored!
Instead of trying to puzzle out and discover what a boss's weakness might be, you can now forego all of that just by having the game tell you what the correct answer is.
I know we get on hand-braking as a problem, but we're still not going to be giving hand-holding
this
a
level
pass.
of hand-holding. Yeah.
Yeah.
It spoils a part of the Mega Man formula that ultimately is highly rewarding to the player. Confronting a boss means you've successfully conquered and survived the preceding level. You know that you only have a few precious attempts to figure out a strategy to use, and have to do the whole stage over again. Doesn't just telling the player diminish the tension that they should feel as they work their way towards the boss? And on the surface, this might not really sound all that important, but imagine that you sit down to play a new Mega Man game, one that you've never played before, and on the main menu is a flowchart showing all the bosses and their respective weaknesses. Will this game still be as fun when you're just told all the solutions to its puzzles? But it gets worse. If you are being receptive to this advice...
Were you guys still able to hear it when I hit mute on the YouTube part?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can still hear it.
Yeah, so I think the problem is the way SyncTube has it set up.
Did you have both YouTube and SyncTube open?
No, just SyncTube.
Okay, because I only had SyncTube open and I never had that echo issue back when I was showing this. I think it's because you're also sharing it so that everyone else can see it in the stream mode.
Yeah.
So you're hearing both your stream and SyncTube.
Yeah, that's the possibility. So at least we have a short-term fix.
Well, hold on. Let me check something. Go ahead and play it.
Once you've gotten your first boss weapon, the rest of the game will play out in a predetermined order as long as you follow the boss weakness patterns. You just have to browse through the level select screen until you find the one that offers new advice, and as long as you follow this order, you'll always have an edge over bosses. Sure. Always. And sure, you could ignore the game's advice and choose the stages in a different order, but you're never incentivized to do so, and by the game's own measure, you'd only be gimping yourself if you did. If I had to design a subtle but extremely effective way to kill replayability in a video game, that would be my choice. At this point, you might be thinking, Ed, a reasonable suggestion here would be simply not to read the advice that spoils each boss fight. Normally, this would be fine, except for this. If you already possess the boss weapon that this current stage's boss is weak to, then that boss you previously defeated will appear in the current stage to change some aspect of it.
Time to dip into my slush fund and create some frozen assets. Pretty cool, right, Beth?
Would you say this is a case of somebody taking signposting and not getting the point?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you! Don't move! In other words, freeze!
Cryo, I've told you. Never mind.
Even if you purposely avoided the advice tab, your efforts were wasted. You're forced into being told what weapon is the best to use. Talk about holding your player by the hand, ears, and eyes. So the weapon system is already a mess, but it doesn't stop there. There's a third gripe, and it's a big one: weapon balance. Like any Mega Man game, you can use your default weapon to defeat every boss if you want to. But the difference with Mighty No. 9 is that it's often the easiest way, even if you already possess the correct boss weapon. Here's why. You can only set 3 boss weapons to quick slots, and if you need a 4th, your only option is to scroll through a vertical listing of boss weapons in real time only, and not on the pause menu, where you could, take a second to think about which weapon you'd like to use.
This was fucking stupid. Like, if I had to liken it to anything, as much as I enjoy Lament of Innocence, there is one thing that it did that I did not care for, and that was the real-time menu.
I don't see why they just didn't do the same thing Mega Man has always done and put L and R to change between your fucking sub-weapons.
Because they have one of the bumpers used for dashing instead of square. But switching between that kind of cycle it's something that's fine on say a keyboard with a FPS. For a console game, no. Especially when you've got, especially late game, when you've got several weapons that you're cycling with.
Unless you make a weapon wheel.
Mm-hmm. Which they didn't. Instead, you have the whole 3 quick slots. And switching between the quick slots is tedious. As far as reallocating weapons for them.
Yep.
And keep in mind that one of the only times that you'd need to be able to quickly select more than 3 weapons is during boss fights, where your downtime is already limited as it is. Even worse, this vertical listing is done by obscure symbols only, and not by text. A plus symbol? 3 vertical lines? Why is this whirling blade represented by a blue letter H? But wait, there's more! Selecting an ability from this drop-down menu requires an additional button press, dedicated to swapping forms. Why not activate each form immediately? Boss fights are already frantic enough, so why do we need the extra second of button input and animation delay to change weapons? You know what, screw all of that, I'm just gonna use the Buster and call it a day. The clunky weapon swapping would be a real problem if switching your weapons was necessary, but for better or worse, this is almost never the case with Mighty No. 9. This is for 2 reasons. The standard Buster is already immensely powerful against bosses due to a shortage of iframes, and the boss weapons have so little utility over the Buster in most cases that it's usually not even worth using them. First, the iframes thing. Typically in Mega Man games, bosses have a short period where they flash after receiving a hit. During this time, they can't be damaged further. This is what I'm calling iframes, or invulnerability frames. Using iframes like this prevents you from just mashing the shoot button as fast as you possibly can and killing a boss in mere seconds. But you also have iframes, which is the reason that after you take a hit, you flash for a few seconds, for a short but noticeable time.
Yeah, but that's also why the Elecman glitch works so well in 1. Because its damage frame stays on screen while you're paused, and pausing resets the Yellow Devil's iframe. So it's just fire elect shot. As soon as it touches the eye, pause. You just start hammering start, and you will kill it. It will die.
Did you end up abusing a turbo controller doing that?
Fuck no. I'm someone who can get past the fucking torture scene in Metal Gear Solid 1 without a turbo controller in port 2 to cheap it so that they don't think I'm cheating.
You know, time, you can't be damaged again. The iframe duration for bosses in Mighty No. 9 is, by comparison, essentially 0.
If people want to really be tortured during the torture sequence, instead of button pressing, it should have been spin one of the analog sticks.
Oh no, they didn't do that because of Nintendo getting sued with the stick on the 64.
Yep.
Well, I don't think that DualShock was necessarily the primary controller at the time. I think they still had just the bone.
They did. DualShock 1 came in like halfway through the PlayStation's life cycle, and a lot of games could still use it. The functionality was just, it took over what the D-pad did.
Wait, though, that contradicts my... I just realized Psychomantis contradicts me, because I will now move your controller with my mind.
Yeah, that's only if you had a control with the vibration function. Yeah.
Yep.
Psychomantis is also the one that tells you that you play too much Castlevania.
Shots in the same time it takes to launch just a few shots from a boss weapon. And since there are no boss iframes, the Buster is almost always the better option if you have a quick finger. It's a really weird design choice because this lack of iframes has typically only been seen in regular stage enemies across the Mega Man series. It's what lets you kill a Sniper Joe without having to wait through several animation cycles. I'm making a wild guess here that the same behavior was extended to Mighty No. 9's bosses to validate the comically sized boss health bars, which is sort of like covering up a broken vase by smashing a couple of wine glasses on top of it and hoping that nobody notices. Instead of creating 2 problems that obfuscate each other.
People are going to notice the smell of spilled wine, so...
Well, he's talking about you broke an expensive vase, then smashed the wine glasses on top to try and hide the vase.
Other, just clean up the first one and let it be done. And what about the very limited utility that these boss weapons provide? Well, some of them are just variations on your regular shot, like Counter Shade Sniper Rifle, which shoots a single, slow-moving bullet with a ridiculously long cooldown before you can fire a second shot. One boss weapon is a close-range-only explosion in a world where everybody uses ranged attacks, and there's also a bulldozer, which disables any ranged attacking you can do and forces you to physically collide with enemies to damage them, after which you're likely to receive some uncontrollable knockback.
Hey, wait a minute.
The disappointment here is twofold.
Yes?
What?
Oh, yeah, he was just... It said, you know, you're forced to combat enemies at close range. It's like, hey, wait a minute.
Only are the level designs ill-suited to take advantage of most of these boss weapons, but the weapons themselves can often be more of a nuisance than simply spamming buster shots. Aside from the 2 or 3 actually useful weapons, the rest will make a single appearance, if that, when you fight whatever boss is weak to them. Take Brandish, for example. This boss uses a sword exclusively, so your best bet is staying at long range where he can't stab you. Yet his weakness is for you to turn into a bulldozer and trundle along while he river dances around you at 6,000 miles per hour. Meanwhile, he's going to be attacking you whenever you're close enough, so enjoy those swords in the face. What a perfectly succinct microcosm of the tug of war.
I think a lot of games that do the whole charging attack kind of thing have some sort of piercing part to it where you don't stop the charge when you hit.
Well, there's also, in most cases, when you have a weapon that is exclusively a charging attack that you charge forward, generally there is the super armor you're mentioning, but in even more cases there is damage reduction or like you can't be affected by anything but the biggest damaging weapons, and even then the damage is reduced.
Or in some cases, knockback, a la the Stinger in Devil May Cry.
Yeah.
You know, you hit them, but it's not like you're right in melee range once the attack hits.
I mean, you could turn Stinger into a million stabs and keep them there.
True.
That this game is constantly playing with itself. You're indirectly encouraged to remain far away from Brandish, but you must be in his face constantly if you want to use the weapon he's weak to. And because that weapon is slow, it's prone to cause you some damage, which means that the best solution is just to use the pea shooter you start the game with. Am I the only one who thinks this is insane? And the weapon you get from Brandish is by far the most broken boss weapon in the game. It's a sword attack, so it's melee only, but it consumes no energy, and just like the Buster, it can attack as fast as you can mash. This is the only weapon that squarely fills the niche of trading your attack range from the Buster for a huge damage boost in this sword, which makes...
You know, maybe the game would have been better if the sword was your default, but then again, it wouldn't be a Mega Man successor according to some purists.
Well, it'd be a Zero successor at that point.
I think that's part of the problem, is that Inafune preferred Zero to Mega Man.
Well, I don't think that's the issue here. I think the issue is that it doesn't fit the niche it's trying to fill. Mm-hmm. As this guy has pointed out already, a lot of Mega Man and Mega Man X, you stay at distance. I mean, if you get close, it's to trade off for a really good reason. Just like when you get the Z-Saber in X3. In the Mega Man Zero games, you were encouraged to get close, well, because Zero's Z-Saber is a thing. And all the other weapons he gets, like the Z-Shield, or the Z-Rod, or the Z-Spear, or the Z-Hand.
Yeah.
The ranged option is your default here, but then your defeat option, the one you use to kill things that can only be killed in a certain way, has to be close range. And that's the problem. If you were encouraged to close range gameplay through making Brandish's sword your opening weapon, there wouldn't be as much of a problem. Oh, there'd still be problems. It just wouldn't be as much.
Mm-hmm.
Explosion and bulldozer skills pretty much obsolete from the start. In fact, Brandish's sword is the only boss weapon that comes close to replacing your Buster as the default weapon of choice. And if you like to play aggressively during boss fights by staying within melee range, then it's the single best weapon in the game by an unreasonably large margin.
I'd like to point out that the reason why things like Brandish's sword are a problem here, or the reason why I keep picking on mage characters in the world's most ubiquitous role-playing game, or most litigious, is when that usefulness becomes such a degree that it steps on everyone else's toes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what's the point of making this badass warrior character with a lot of melee weapons when the mages just sit back there and go boom, 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 dead?
This is also why everyone makes fun of Metal Blade, because it more or less has the same problem of stepping on everyone else's toes.
It only gets away with it because of the cool factor, but even then, it still gets a little bit of mockery.
Mm-hmm. It gets away with it for two reasons: the cool factor and the fact that it was unintentional.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, when it comes to sequels around that era, I give a little bit of slack because a lot of times people didn't quite know what they were doing.
Plus, let's bear in mind what I said earlier about the fact that they were trying to program that game while in the midst of working on other projects. You can't exactly fault them for missing something like that when they're trying to juggle 50 things at once.
Some of these 8 boss weapons are just straight up recycled from previous Mega Man games. Beck's Bulldozer Trundle is identical to Mega Man 6's Charge Kick, except it lets you go infinitely, and wouldn't you know it, just like the Bulldozer, Charge Kick also has a nasty habit of getting you killed because it puts you so close to enemies. Battalion's Remote Cannon is literally just the Crash Bomb from Mega Man 2, and while I love that game, I'm starting to realize that you never really use Crash Bomb outside of situations where it's strictly necessary to break a wall or hurt a boss. It's really too impractical to use in any other situation. If you're gonna borrow or iterate on classic Mega Man weapons, I would not advise you to start with these 2. There's one last consequence of Mighty No. 9's boss weapons. As we've already discussed before, Mighty No. 9 lets you tackle its stages in any order, so every level has to be able to be completed with nothing more than the Buster. What I mean is, the developers can never be sure whether you have a certain boss weapon, so they can't create a level that requires one. Remember at the beginning of this analysis when we mentioned that good weapon design allows for secrets and power-ups to be placed in clever and creative ways inside levels? Having these little rewards and stages reinforces the fact that there is no single best order to play each stage, but by and large, each level in Mighty is a linear trek from left to right, with only occasional vertical level design. And even if you have other boss weapons, you'll find that there isn't really ever a place to use them creatively. And since, in this genre, levels are largely distinguished by their own unique mechanics, Mighty's levels tend to come off as bland and boring even though they're visually distinct. And without this complementary presence of boss weapons in levels, there's really little incentive to revisit stages once you've completed them, especially since the game will, as we just talked about, simply tell you the best order to play its level.
Back with the original Mega Man games and even the X games, you had an incentive to go back into levels you'd already finished because there was stuff that was teased that you couldn't get to.
E-tanks, heart tanks, his capsules, all of it. Although, I will say that while there wasn't a suggested order to the games, most people, when they were experimenting, would start with usually where your icon started at the boss select. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure that the first level the selection puts you on in Mega Man X is Chill Penguin, which is a good place to start because it gets you the leg upgrade as fast as possible so you get the dash.
Pretty much. Continuing on.
It seems like you're discouraged at every possible opportunity, from experimenting with level order, replaying levels to find secrets, and enjoying the puzzle of working out each boss's weakness. Once you take all of that out of a Mega Man style game, how much is really left? And a final point here concerns Mighty's alternate fire mechanic, which in-game is called Action Shift. Alt Fire essentially lets you shoot a quick burst at a 45-degree angle downward, while always leaping backwards, which, if the level design is suitable, can have lots of uses. But it's rare in Mighty that you'll consciously wish you could shoot at this angle, and you'll find Alt Fire to mostly go unused. If you make a conscious effort to use it wherever you can, you'll quickly come to realize that Alt Fire has significant drawbacks. When you Alt Fire, you can't shoot without also jumping backwards, so you can't do it on narrow platforms, and you wouldn't want to use it around spikes, which can be on the floor or the ceiling. In fact, many levels have an abundance of instant death traps. Much of Brandish's level is...
I never saw the point of alternate fire, of this sort of alt fire, when you have so much of the level designed in this very horizontal sense.
Yeah.
By the way, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and take this opportunity to drop out. I'm not feeling it.
All right, man. Stay frosty.
Peace out, John.
Hey, guys.
Brandish's level is actually just one giant bottomless pit, and Seismic's stage is not only loaded with spikes, but vertically cramped. Countershade's level takes place entirely indoors, mostly in hallways that are extremely dense with platforms and enemies, not to mention that Countershade constantly fires on you no matter where you are. You can also alt-fire without the fire, which is really just leaping backwards without shooting, and during your jump, you have a few frames where Beck can't be damaged. This is, again, thanks to the iframes that we talked about above. Having a few iframes during this jump is a cool concept, and it opens up more design space by allowing an insane amount of bullets on screen, while still giving you an out if you're suddenly faced with a wall of enemy fire. But because you always jump backwards and always by a set distance, and the invincibility window is extremely narrow, you'll be hard-pressed to really make effective use of it. Just like the dash mechanic, Alt-Jump and Alt-Fire look really good in controlled environments, but they falter in actual gameplay because levels are not designed to accommodate them. So the circumstances under which you'd want to use Alt-Fire are, in most cases, extremely limited, if they even exist at all. But there's so much wasted potential here. Alt-Fire gives the developers the chance to free up design space with boss weapons. Since every weapon can now shoot downward, there's no need to dedicate an entire boss weapon to providing that single ability. So maybe you could create a new weapon that reverses gravity, or slows time, or weakens all the enemies on screen. But if you implement the Alt-Fire system and then fail to do anything interesting with that extra design space, you might as well not have Alt-Fire in the first place. It's a
The idea of introducing a cool mechanic that doesn't get any use, the first thing that comes to mind with that is, well, a lot of things from Devil May Cry 2, but for this purposes, I'll say 2 sometime. Now, some of that is due to how the game had its firefights just with way too much space. But the problem is the way the game's designed doesn't really allow for that kind of area control kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there is area control in Devil May Cry, just not in that sense.
way to create potential in limited design space, but you still have to take advantage of that opening to make it all worth it. And Mighty No. 9 seems to leave most of that potential untapped. So we've now seen how boss weapons and weaknesses in Mighty No. 9 don't contribute to a cohesive experience. The discovery of trying out different weapons is marred by the game explicitly telling you what to use. Bewildering health bars and iframe mechanics during boss fights discourage experimentation, since the buster is always good enough. And the boss weapons themselves are largely uninteresting, uninspired, or unbalanced. And the action platforming that this genre thrives on only further diminishes any.
I'd also like to point out, there was no utility with any of Mighty No. 9's boss weapons. They were all attacks.
I think the guy in the video kind of said the same thing.
Potential value that boss weapons could have. This discussion has made frequent reference towards level design as an underlying problem for combat mechanics. But we haven't yet done that deep dive into level design to illustrate this point. You know, it's no secret that Mighty No. 9 was built on the framework established by Mega Man and refined over 30 years of releases. That's a lot of time for us to refine the level design of Mega Man-style games. And coupled with Keiji Inufune's association with both Mega Man and Mighty No. 9, it's hard not to carry certain expectations of quality in level design. So Mighty No. 9 generally toes the line with an intro stage, 8 robot master stages, a few Wily-type endgame stages, and if you can believe it, a stealth stage featuring Call, Beck's female robot companion whom we know nothing about, and whose lack of personality puts a 2x4 to shame.
New tips are added as the game progresses. Be sure to check back and view them regularly.
In this third...
I think from what I remember, the intent that they had with Call was someone who was robotic that becomes less so as the story goes on, but somebody didn't get the memo.
You mean the voice director?
Yeah, because I could have sworn that when I was playing with the Japanese voices on, that the Japanese had a little bit more personality to her.
Well, that's because she's voiced by Mao in Japanese. Of course she's going to have more personality than a 2x4.
Wait, isn't... No, hold on. Let me look up who voices Call in this game, because I could have sworn it was this one person.
Julie something, last I looked.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much.
Julie Nathanson.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, that's right. Erica Lindbeck voiced role in Mega Man 11. Oh, never mind then.
All right.
We're going to see how Mighty No. 9's level design is of equal quality to its many mechanics. By that I mean unpolished, unbalanced, uninspired, and audaciously contrarian to both common sense and game design logic. If you haven't seen our videos on controls and boss weapons in Mighty No. 9, you can check them out here. They're not required viewing if you haven't seen them already, but they do set a nice backdrop to the discussion. Instead of a level-by-level analysis, in which case we'd only be repeating the same glaring design flaws that are common to many stages, let's look at the level design flaws themselves. Here are just a couple of designs that are common to most or all levels. Instant death traps, blind leaps into instant death traps, the slowest death trap ever devised, untelegraphed damage, visuals that get in the way of playing safely, an E-tank system that provides health refills only when you don't want them and never when...
Would you consider that falling column there a dick move?
Yes.
well, it is shaped kind of like one.
I consider it a dick move because it's positioned in a way that unless you are playing with some sort of sense of precognizance or having played the level before, you know that you need to avoid both the damage from the enemy and the column coming down at the same time. Except the damage from the enemy you can't avoid because it's falling balls from the sky that are hitting random areas. Yes, fuck that.
Also the whole thing of there's no indication beforehand that you are gonna have to deal with background-based hazards.
Well, there is behind you as you're going.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure someone will argue there's hints, but those hints are so barely there that it's again a case of handbraking.
Do they actually have apologists for this game?
Yes, there are plenty of apologists for Mighty Number No. But
Like,
that's also because they felt like
And mechanics that are underused, underexplained, or both. So let's consider this a best of for bad game design, not a comprehensive listing. Otherwise, we'd be here all night.
Oh, that kind of gap is no.
You have to use the crouch dash.
Something that the game doesn't even bother explaining.
Instant death traps and
exists
platformers
to you
used
until
to go
then.
hand in hand back in the earlier generations of gaming, mainly as a way to gate the player's progression and or artificially extend the length of a game. A run of Contra for the NES can be as short as 15 minutes if you don't get hit, but the game's extreme difficulty may have had you playing it for months. Or you might spend hours trying to beat Ninja Gaiden, only to be defeated by the knife-throwing scum weasel that throws knives at you while his hawk friend woodpeckers you into oblivion.
What the fuck?
Or how about jumping over...
Yeah, those fucking birds.
Don't you love it, Monk?
Fuck off.
It's like poetry. It rhymes.
pit when an enemy suddenly jumps out of it, perfectly and conveniently positioned to stun you and send you down into the pit. It's not that level design choices like these are inherently bad, although there is an argument for that, but if they aren't appropriately telegraphed, signposted, or otherwise introduced to the player in advance, then they frustrate the player because they seem to come out of left field. But luckily for us, the gaming industry has taken great strides since those days, and developers have learned a lot about how to design enjoyable experiences. Developers today can rely less on artificial trial and error challenges. We have much better tools for developing games and almost limitless storage capacity for doing so. So we don't need to make games so hard that completing 5 or 6 levels could take weeks for the average player. So it's a real shame that Mighty No. 9's level design is so primitive, abundant with the trappings of games designed decades before it. It's so severe at times that
That thing is definitely a dick move. That sort of unavoidable damage.
They probably expect you to use one of the boss weapons, but again, that requires them to know that you actually have said boss weapon in the stage.
Alternatively, they just expect you to hit the button hard enough that you won't have to do it.
feels like it's trying to discourage you from wringing any enjoyment out of it whatsoever. I mean it. This is a game that not only shouldn't be played, it feels like it doesn't even want to be played by anyone. That attitude is the subtext that bleeds through Muddy's levels at almost every opportunity. Let's look at instant death first.
With all due caution. Impossible. Nick is one of my most resilient designs.
We're going to use 2 specific stages here as examples, the mines and the highway. The mines are littered with purple instant death spikes, and they're applied liberally. They're even in places where their presence serves no intelligent game design purpose, or where an instant death would feel frustratingly unfair. The highway is basically an ocean of instant death with islands of safety, and getting hit in the air will stun you, and often means that death is imminent. Add in these flying enemies that follow you wherever you go, and infinitely spawn these little minions just over your head, and what should be a simple jump to the next car becomes a huge nuisance. And how about this section, where the boss will destroy cars in a specific sequence, giving you mere seconds to react and adapt to this new mechanic before you die. This is a great example of a failure to signpost. In other words, most of your deaths from this stage are going to be because of trial and error, not because of a lack of skill. Of course, you can avoid death in this stage if you're capable of precognition. Otherwise, you might just feel like you're...
Yep, there's that precognition you mentioned before, and unfortunately, I'm a monk, not a wizard.
Okay, man.
your head against a wall and progressing by inches. Are you bored of instant death? How about slow death? Here's the slowest death trap ever devised. In the final stage, once you step on this elevator, enemies will keep spawning all around you as you descend. Once you get to the end, there is a path to the right, but there's no immediate danger. But if you don't move quickly enough, or you want to check for potential secrets before you leave, you'll be pretty surprised when the elevator falls away and carries you to your death. Now, a falling platform by itself isn't the end of the world, but once it starts to fall, you can no longer dash into this passage, meaning you have no choice. You have to kill yourself. Although in the game's defense, I will say that having these enemies spawn on the left side here is a really good incentive for the player to stick to the right side. These blocks are just in the way here, and if they weren't there, it'd be really easy to do. Okay. The elevators come to a complete stop. Okay. Can we... Is this block perfectly positioned to prevent you from getting through? Oh my god. This happened to me my first time here.
On the scale of 1 to handbraking, how handbraking is that?
It's not handbraking, it's just a dick move.
What is... okay, I'm not familiar with the handbraking term.
Handbraking is his term for god damn it.
Yeah. It is the polar opposite of hand-holding, where an obstacle is put in front of the player that you either need to have some sort of foreknowledge or some sort of precognition to reasonably overcome.
This isn't handbraking because you can overcome it just by going, oh, I can dash to the right after I get that cube out of the way.
Yeah.
But like he said, if you want to be cautious or hang around and look for a secret, you're going to fuck yourself.
Mm-hmm. Or in some cases, like there are some cases where what I've considered handbraking, you could figure out if you know what's coming, but that's irrelevant to the matter at hand when it comes to handbraking. I didn't come up with the term. A friend of mine came up with it when I asked if there was a term for the polar opposite of hand-holding, because I do think that deserves just as much hate as hand-holding gets in game design.
Yeah. I'm just glad that TV tropes, tropes in general, did also name it "Guide Damn It" or "Guide Dang It."
Yeah. It's the same principle, and if there's one genre that's the most notorious for this kind of thing, oddly enough, it's not platformers. Well, there's some infamous ones in platformers, but the lion's share is not in that genre. It's in
point and click.
Yep. King's Quest has been my whipping boy my entire life, for this exact reason.
Monk didn't keep his cake until the Snowy Mountain.
I know with adventure games the term moon logic is also used, which is the same principle.
Well, moon logic is thinking so far outside of what your normal logic is that you're thinking from a different planet, but it can still be reasoned through under that different planet's logic. It's a little bit different than Guide Dang It. It's as annoying. Yes. It's as annoying, it's just different. In fact, it is a different trope.
I do remember someone asking me if I thought any of the Phoenix Wright games had that problem, and to my knowledge, no.
There's one.
There's actually a couple, but they're few and far between, thank God.
The one I can think of is during the trial of Matt on Guard, where you have to present the Jammin' Ninja's button to Wendy Oldbag, and there's no indication she was his huge fan. There is a bigger indication she's his fan in Japanese, and it didn't translate well.
See, that would count as handbraking.
Not handbraking. That's more translation. What was it? Translation. There's one that on the Guide Dang It page. Yeah, Lost in Translation or something like that. And
Dub-induced plot hole.
Dub-induced plot hole is another good one. The big thing is that I still didn't need a guide. I just saved and started presenting evidence to her and then resetting my save through trial and error. It's like, fuck this, I'm not looking up a guide. Screw that. If this isn't logical, let's do it the only way a scientist can. Try every option!
But that sort of trial and error is something you shouldn't have to do.
Yes, and again, it's not an issue of the game's design being bad, it's an issue of somewhere in the localization it just didn't translate well.
My defense,
there's actually
this
another
is the first
one
and only
that's
time
pretty bad,
that such
which
an
was in Ace Attorney 3, where you are having to cross-examine this one witness who was not present in the court recently. If you save and don't get back to the game for about a week, you have no idea
what it was that they were supposed to have missed and therefore should not know unless they were the culprit.
Mm-hmm.
Any time that such an elevator mechanic is used in Mighty Number 9. And hey, this is just my personal experience, but I thought that elevators go both up and down, so I thought it was a relatively safe assumption that this elevator isn't just a single-use item. I mean, who designed this elevator to fall away when it reaches the bottom floor? That's ridiculous.
Terry the platypus is my elevator
down an elevator shaft. Wonder where this elevator goes when it falls away. And who in the world would purchase such an elevator, knowing it's limited to a single use? All I'm saying is it's fiscally irresponsible to do such a thing. You'd be putting that money into a Roth IRA instead. The important takeaway here is, again, signposting. There is a complete failure to provide some sort of suitable mechanical context to nudge the player's expectation one way.
You know, there was one simple way to make it so that that's not a dick move.
What?
Make it so Beck can pull up and dash into crevices like that if they're big enough to dash into while he's holding on to the ledge.
Or just a
one
good
way or
old
the
triangle
other.
jump off.
In other words, it feels like it's out of left field. And the only way to learn that this elevator will fall is to see it happen. And if you spend a few extra seconds dashing around, you're going to go with it. These examples are just the most egregious that I could find, but there are plenty more within every other level in the game. The bottom line is that Mighty Number 9 doesn't really explain itself well enough for you to understand its mechanics. This basically translates into blind jumps that sometimes end in spikes, and plenty of segments where trial and error is really your only option. Because until that point, you can't really know what the developers have intended you to do. Next up, even more underexplained and underused mechanics, and how level design generally clashes with these mechanics. We'll also talk about the game's visuals and visual quality, previously on Game Soup.
New tips are added as the game progresses.
With all due caution.
Here's the slowest death trap ever devised.
What the hell went wrong?
And who in the world would purchase such an elevator?
You gonna shoot me? How, you gonna try to shoot me?
That's probably the one good place for alt fire.
Yeah, hang on. It jumped.
Oh, it didn't.
And now it's muted on my end. What the hell?
Believe it or not, the visuals are also a huge issue in Mighty Number 9, and I don't mean the quality of the visuals. Although, I mean, well, yeah. What I mean is that oftentimes the background and foreground are so visually similar in color, in saturation, in scroll speed, that sometimes you can get hit by things in plain sight because you literally didn't see them. The final boss is also guilty of this poor visual distinction. Wow, there sure are a lot of colors happening right now. In a situation like this, when you know the player is going to be staring at the same screen or the same set of colors for a prolonged period of time, it's probably in your best interest to make sure that those colors aren't, killing your eyes. Maybe a little softer on the neons here, and the brights. Everything's extremely bright, and the boss is the same color as the background. Wow, that's incredibly unfun. The fight is already pretty hectic, and it gets a lot worse when you can't rely on your peripheral vision, because threats just seem to melt away into the background if you're not looking directly at them. Have you ever noticed how projectiles in games tend to be either brightly colored or outlined, or at least decently contrasted with backgrounds? This is what happens when you don't do that. So please do that. And here's my favorite example of visual trickery. It's these flying road sign bots in the highway stage. They look pretty innocuous, right? But their move speed is either very close or identical to the background's scrolling speed. Well, this could be problematic. The background is pretty busy already with electric and neon colors, so when these robots lumber towards you from the right, they tend to simply fade into the background until you literally collide with them. I've played this stage so many times, and I've been surprised by these more than I care to admit. And maybe it's just me, and it won't be a problem for every single player, but it really highlights how
It was a problem for me, I can tell you that much.
See, I never played Mighty Number Nope. I avoided it like a plague. Also, good pause, Monk, because there's the only good thing in the game.
I was one of those poor saps that had supported it on Kickstarter, so I was duty bound. I was obligated to play it, and
I will,
managed to get all the way to the final boss. I didn't ever beat it.
I will say this, Doc. Remember that's the sunk cost fallacy.
I only played it because a friend of mine had sent me a copy, and I had told him if I get sent a copy, I will try to get through it. Everything afterwards was my own stubbornness.
Or sunk cost fallacy. Good job.
Now, in this case, it was a more keeping my word kind of thing.
You said try to get through it. If you try and then hate it like 5 minutes later, you still tried.
I didn't want to admit the thing beat me. You're as stubborn as I am. You've got no room to talk.
I'm extremely stubborn. I've still dropped games that I hated.
A lack of visual distinction can make levels harder than they're intended to be. I can't believe I'm saying this, and if you're a regular viewer of this channel, you know how much we harp on overusing sign behavior in games. But here's a situation where that would have been a perfect solution. If these robots had minor horizontal sign behavior, perhaps with a random offset to their period, they'd easily stick out from the background, without even...
That's an interesting visual note. I'd say the one that's stopping at the bottom would be easier to spot compared to the one that's moving at the same speed as everything else.
Yeah, that's his point. That it's
so much as a recall.
Because those sign robots move at a near similar speeds to the background, they become in your subconscious brain a part of the background.
So that's my little rant on visuals. Mighty also has a ridiculous amount of untelegraphed or unavoidable damage, and it happens frequently enough that I question whether it's simply poor design or an intentional punishment of the player. Maybe you're playing the military base, and you feel pretty good about yourself because you found this secret area, and you know you're going to be rewarded because there's a health refill in here. But for some reason, it also contains an enemy who will shoot you the second you step into this nook. Why would you have an enemy placed here, especially one that shoots missiles at you and you have so little space to avoid it? The game doesn't know whether it should reward you for finding this room or whether it should ambush you, so it just does both. But this is not even the worst part. The only way to leave this room is through a blind drop downwards. Now I know you're thinking, there's no way there'd be unavoidable damage or an instant death trap at the bottom here. I mean, what kind of sadistic game designer would provide a bonus room with a health refill only to immediately steal it away from you by... Again,
it's not unavoidable. You can dash over the box to your right.
Technically,
and like
you
he
can,
says,
but I do see his point.
Well, yes, I know. He also, the correction he put on the screen that said the only logical way to leave the room, you could backtrack through the gap you just dashed through and go through the level as normal instead. Mm-hmm. Either way, it's bad. It's very bad.
But it's compounding on that whole blind drop problem.
Yeah, it's absolutely bad.
And your reward for finding this room is a small health refill that's completely negated by unavoidable damage. Cool, huh? Yeah, real cool. Nice, dude, nice. Yeah, bro, nice. There's a part just like this in the mines, too. If you drop down past where you need to go near the beginning of the stage, you'll come across this lone box. Once you've shot it enough times to break it, you'll be rewarded with this, taking damage from an enemy hiding inside. And there's nothing else of value here. Yay! Why? Just why? Why any of this? Is it teaching the player that boxes have enemies hiding inside of them? Well, no, because the vast majority of these boxes don't have such a trap. Maybe it's teaching the player to stay away from boxes when they're destroyed. Well, maybe, but given how horizontally narrow this passage is, I would think that most players are going to take a hit here anyway.
I think it's an attempt to do a troll move, but... it's not the right place to do a troll move.
You're not Cat Mario, don't be Cat Mario.
Everybody loves being chased with a threat of instant death, right? I mean, Mega Man X did it, right, in Armored Armadillo stage, so it can't be bad here, right? When you drop down here and you see what's coming, it's the wall of death over there. You might think back to when other games use a similar mechanic, and you'll probably decide that the most important thing to do right now is just to go to the right as fast as you can, killing only what's necessary. But here's where it gets crazy. If you do that, you'll find yourself on these barrels. You can't shoot straight down in this game, right? A downward dash doesn't damage these barrels, so you're clearly meant to shoot them somehow. But by the time you've realized this, you're already screwed. So just turn around, pray, and slowly wait for death.
How could this happen to me?
Or if you're thinking, oh yeah, this is a great place to use alternative fire to aim downwards, right? You could try to alt fire here, and maybe you'll hit the barrels once or twice, but you'll also leap backwards towards the edge of this platform or even fall off of it entirely. There's just not enough room on this platform, and the angle is just too awkward to hit these barrels consistently. No, what you are required to do, in fact, is weaken and dash into these shooters to gain a temporary buster power-up that shoots through walls. There are few, if any, other levels in the game that straight up require you to possess a temporary upgrade. This is a unique situation that once again fails to signpost or telegraph. It hasn't been previously explained or even hinted at to the player in any way. In other words, this is not a case of under-explaining. This is a case of just no explaining at all. But this whole sequence, you know...
You're still dead.
The literal swim, damn it.
I don't know about literal. This is a literal. This is a literal shoot. Damn it!
Mm-hmm.
It feels more like I took his bending away, except it's more of a Diablos ex machina.
Yes, definitely a Diablos ex machina.
Sequence, you know, requiring this temporary upgrade and all, might have been forgivable if it was first introduced separately in a safer, less hectic area. In general, for good game design, mechanics and obstacles are introduced in isolation at first. Then, once the player sufficiently understands them, designers can feel free to mix concepts together to create increasingly challenging situations. But if you just skip straight over the mixing concepts together part, especially when one of those is just a wall of death, most players are going to suffer at least one death here that they felt was cheap. There are plenty of places in other levels too, where not possessing the correct temporary buff will force you to take damage to proceed. Doesn't it kind of feel bad, like they're actively trying to discourage...
Yeah, they expect you to absorb that shooter so you can shoot through that wall to shoot that guy ahead of you. I was right.
Mm-hmm.
And see, that's...
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, they would do well to, I don't know, listen to some of the audio commentary from Portal and Portal 2, where they had to introduce concepts very early on, so that way players would introduce the concepts in a safe environment early on, so players would know to use them when it actually counts.
Well, and as they pointed out at the beginning of this whole collage of all of these videos put together, Ego Raptor in Sequelitis pointed out exactly how Mega Man X did all of this type of, here's how you can use things from the game in a safe environment so that you can then use them in a more hectic environment later, all in the intro level.
Mm-hmm. What instantly comes to mind when it comes to safe environments is the CQB test in Modern Warfare. You know, it's a speed test, but you do have a safe environment before you end up having to do the real thing.
People like you, to take your time and experience each level, doesn't it feel like you're playing a game that signals to you at every chance that it just doesn't want to be played? Well, here's some salt for that wound. The same thing happens mere seconds later in the same chase sequence. If you can't shoot through walls here, you'll die again, plain and simple. And yes, if you're wondering, it is quite easy for the Buster power-up from earlier to have worn off by this time, so you have to kill another enemy. This isn't even a variation on the first trick, it's just the same trick repeated twice! Oh yeah, here's a great moment. You finally reach the boss of this stage, and you discover that he has a few attacks that are seemingly impossible to dodge.
Bumps ahead!
Unless, of course, by accident, you discover that you can hang from the edges of this arena. But wait, these ledges don't look anything like the ledges that we've seen all throughout the stage up to this point. So why would any reasonable player automatically assume that these ledges are grabbable too? You think that's bad? Well, check out this cool attack.
I mean, I kind of assumed that, but I'm not a reasonable player.
Is there any way to avoid those if you are a normal human with normal reaction times, and who isn't staring at the top third of the screen because you're too busy fighting a boss? Probably my favorite case of unavoidable damage.
I actually have to put some criticism on the player there, not the design of that boss room.
Yeah.
All of the grabbable ledges have been these clear, squarish openings with yellow around them. It may not be in the same style, but yes, you could tell that those are grabbable ledges.
Maybe he just needed some paint there.
I think the issue here is in that stage, you have those same neon circles in the background as well.
Mm-hmm. Like I still don't think that that's enough, Monk. I think that those ledges are fairly well telegraphed. I knew what they were before he started commenting on the boss arena.
Spawning directly on top.
Additionally, the whole, how can you as a normal human avoid the dropping boxes when you're focused on the boss? You're not paying attention to the top third of the screen. I'm like, bitch, if you've ever seen a Mega Man game, ever, you are paying attention to the entire fucking screen in a boss arena, because so many of them have attacks that come from the walls or the ceiling.
I think a bigger problem is how they pop in.
even then, those dirt plumes at the top that are coming down signpost for a good 2 seconds. It's a skill issue on his end. I'm straight up going to say.
Well, not to mention that's
it
kind
happens
of a
way
Mega
more
Man
often
boss
than you might
battle
think.
thing. It's trial
Because
and
there are
error.
several stages where the camera stops scrolling at a certain point, and you have to survive for about a minute or so in some arena-style gauntlet, with enemies spawning all over the place. Of course, the problem here is a lack of signposting. Enemies can spawn anywhere, without an obvious spawn point. And because there's no warning, you get just a fraction of a second's notice to react. Of course, these spawn positions are fixed, so as long as you just memorize the whole thing, you'll do fine. But is that really the best way to give the player a challenge? Other times, during these survival sections, enemies will actually fly in from the foreground, which is a really cool idea on paper, but they gain collision the instant they reach the main layer.
Yeah, that's stupid. They shouldn't gain collision until they're
You
fully
can't actually
fixed in the
predict
main
where they
layer.
intend to go, so even if you see them coming in, there's no way you have the time or the information to do anything about it. Well, I'm flying on in, I'm gonna hit you. Only I could see the future. I wouldn't have played this game. So this is what happens when you design your levels without the player in mind. If you fail to introduce your mechanics in a logical order, then the player will be constantly running up against a wall. And the game itself risks losing all cohesion in favor of just pure chaos. If your mechanics, even though they might sound good on paper, are just half-baked in their implementation, then at the end of the day, your game is just going to be the sum of its parts, and nothing more. Previously on Game Soup. Well, I'm flying on in, I'm gonna hit you. This isn't even a variation on the first trick. It's just the same trick repeated twice, meaning you have no choice. You have to kill yourself.
With all due caution.
You'll be rewarded with this, taking damage from an enemy hiding inside.
Mighty number 9. What the hell went wrong?
It's done. It's over now.
Patreon.com/GameSoup. Please. Where did we leave off again? Was it here? Yeah, that's right. Okay, so there are several stages where the camera stops scrolling at a certain point, and you have to survive in some arena-style gauntlet, with enemies spawning all over the place. You know,
I remember the Strider remake that we got from Double Helix, which is actually really good, had those sort of gauntlet areas. But the thing is, you had a much larger room to work with.
That and the fact that Strider is kind of made for that sort of slew. Slogging through enemies is kind of his job.
Yeah.
These arena-style sections are designed solely just to piss you off. I mean it. Just look at this one. What if you don't have any boss weapons yet? Well, if you're brighter than me, you might consider using alternate fire. But since this is just one of the few instances in the entire game where alt fire actually serves a purpose, you may have just forgotten about it and tanked the damage instead. If the developers want the player to use alt fire here, give a signal or hint at it through the level design somehow. Like, I don't know, you put an unreasonable number of these guys in some extremely narrow path so that it's very clear that you're not supposed to just jump in and tank. And make it so that the only way to hit them is by shooting at a 45-degree angle. Heh, alt fire. That's also a great segue into some other underused and underexplained mechanics. Of course, alt fire is by far the biggest offender here, but there are plenty of others.
If I was in charge, and the whole alt fire thing was suggested, my counteroffer would be diagonal shooting during some sort of delayed descent.
My counteroffer would be, why don't we do aimed shooting like in a bunch of other Mega Man-alikes?
That too.
Did you know that you can dash while ducking? If you do this, your current height is preserved, and you'll do a sort of duck dash, I guess, which looks only marginally shorter than the regular dash, so it's not really clear why these two different kinds of dashes even exist together. Well, except for this single room. You are required, yes, you are required to duck dash, to pass under this instant death wheel. And if you try a regular dash, it'll just kill you. You might expect that this duck dashing might be introduced to us in the game's first level, the tutorial stage. But no, when you approach this giant wheel, there's this lazy on-screen text that simply prompts you to do a duck dash. If this duck dashing was properly explained elsewhere, the developers could expect us to already know the move exists. But they're so uncertain that they've properly taught the player basic controls that the answer is literally given to you. Wait, was I wrong? Is this actually another place to use the duck dash? Wait, you don't even need to. It's just a regular dash. But this is only half of it. Even knowing about this duck dashing, the window to pass under this wheel is unforgivingly narrow. You have to get so close that you're virtually touching it on one side to be able to dash under to the other side successfully. So everything about this moment just seems to be highlighting this one duck dashing move, Why is precision duck dashing so important that it has its own set piece with an on-screen solution displayed? Is it really worth bringing the pacing to a grinding halt? Platformers in general should require some precision and movement, sure, but do they really benefit from this kind of micromanagement? It's sort of like being given a sliding tile puzzle along with step-by-step instructions on solving it. Completing it at that point is really just a formality, and any entertainment or practical value this puzzle may have had is now completely wasted and gone. The same goes here. You have the puzzle, you have the instructions, but the game is going to condescend to challenge your intelligence anyway until you complete it. And if you aren't measuring this dash pretty carefully, you just might die in what feels like a completely unwarranted manner. Throughout all of this, you might have noticed that on the pause screen, you have 2 E-tanks in the game. Actually, no, it's misleading for me to refer to them as E-tanks because they function completely differently. They charge faster when you get more points via dash combos, so on first glance, it looks like you actually have an incentive to play skillfully. Actually, wait, no, because whenever you die, the progress on your E-tanks is set back to 0. Oh.
Yeah, that's an idea.
Yeah, that one ought to have the designer drawn and quartered.
E-tanks are supposed to be persistent, to the point that, once again, to refer to Sequelitis because it's Ego Raptor's last great hurrah, and also was really fucking good. He pointed out in his section, hey! Just the place where he gushed a whole bunch about Mega Man X. He said, you know when you're fighting the last boss, Sigma, and you die, and you run out of all your E-tanks? Well, just before Sigma, you go up the walls where these dudes infinitely spawning, and you could just use the charged version of Armored Armadillo's weapon to kill them and refill your E-tanks. E-tanks are supposed to be persistent.
Yeah, and the idea of them being reset is a case of what's the point? And I can't think of very many platformers that have an E-tank equivalent that even do that kind of resetting.
They don't reset mine. That's the point.
Mm-hmm.
At the very least, they ought to be able to be. If they're going to reset on death, you ought to be able to refill them in the boss room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like the big thing here is that in the case of any action platformer, which is what Mega Man is and what this is, that has a health restoring mechanic that is like that, like the E-tank. I'm going to say like the E-tank because the E-tank is basically the perfected version of it for everybody. It is supposed to be persistent between levels. You're supposed to be able to refill it in some fashion. And it is not to be lost upon death. It should be lost upon game over.
Mm-hmm.
Where everything resets. But I don't know. It's like Inafune took everything he saw while helping make Mega Man games and ignored it.
Oh, alright. What? Now imagine you're playing through a stage, you finally reach the boss room, and you die to him your first time through. On your next life, you spawn outside the boss room, but you don't have any E-tanks. In fact, the first time you fight a boss, you probably spent a lot of time just observing patterns, getting hit here and there while you learn those patterns, and generally going on defense. I'm going to go out on a limb here and make a broad generalization, but nobody needs an E-tank on the first encounter with a boss, because they almost always expect to be killed the first time. I mean, you're probably coming in with less than full health, or low weapon energy, and so the only time that Mighty's E-tanks are available to you is the only time you don't actually need them. Now just toss in that limited lives mechanic and boss attacks that are instant death, and you can see how this starts to get pretty frustrating. The way that these...
Oh, Hikaru's... Thank you for the raid, Hikaru. For those who do not know.
Welcome! You've managed to flabbergast the monk, everybody. My name is Xanatrix Zadare. I am Chaos Incarnate and the bane of the motherfucking monk's existence. You have managed to overwhelm him. Good job! I love it when this much chaos occurs.
For those of you first coming in, I am Mildra. I am the gaming monk, and the man who does way too many fucking interviews in the span of a day. We are just going through our little discussion about Inafune and Itagaki, and using and reacting to a little
Igarashi.
Igarashi.
Itagaki is an entirely different person, Monk.
He'll get his.
It's an entirely different genre of games.
Like I said, he'll get his.
You flustered him so much he forgot who we were talking about. Good job.
Yeah, also, thank you, Melly, for the follow. I hope you enjoy. And thanks for the raid, Hikaru, and stay frosty. But, holy shit.
Yeah.
But
yeah, look at this.
Let's continue on.
Refills function, the logical conclusion is that you should be using them during a stage if you take too much damage, or at the very end of a stage leading up to a boss fight. But you can have as many as 9 lives before you game over, which kinda sucks all the value out of that proposition. And besides the instant death traps, where an E-tank is worthless anyway, the next most challenging thing about Mighty No. 9 is its boss fights. So why do we have health refills that don't really seem to be interested in providing actual utility to the average player?
It's a little bit unreasonable to expect any game to assume its players are going to start out on a no-death run. I mean, yeah, there's going to be some people who are going to do it because they're crazy, but I'd say for the most part, no-death runs happen the second or third time you're playing through the game.
If you want to, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do, however, once again have to say this is game soup and a skill issue. He's like, the first time that you go into a boss, you're probably going to go in, observe patterns, and assume you're going to die. I'm like, no. You go in and observe the pattern while fighting back, hoping you'll win.
Unless, of course, your health is, stupidly low, in which case, yeah, tactical suicide might be your next option, but...
Might be, but I have never met a single person, and I know this is anecdotal, I know, a single person who has played any of these types of action platformers, especially having played the actual Mega Man games, who went into a boss battle room going, oh, I just better stand around and kind of dodge and hope I don't die too fast to get the pattern down. No, they're shooting and jumping. It's jump and shoot, man, for a reason.
Well, there's... technically, I will sometimes not do what you just described, but I will, immediately just try and crash myself into the boss if I'm trying to get my health back up to normal so I can have a decent chance at beating him, because I don't like wasting a whole bunch of time trying to fight the guy, only to get killed halfway through because, I only had 1 blip of health.
Mm-hmm.
That's different. That's very different, Doc. I'm not saying that's the same thing. But everybody I know goes in with the intent of, I'm gonna beat that boss, even if it's not this first time, so I'm gonna try my hardest. If try your hardest is, I've got 1 blip of health, better to get a full health bar, yeah, I understand. So, I have things I disagree with this guy on, just out of fucking principle and the fact that, I have a brain. It seems like sometimes he loses his brain.
Brain and brain, what is brain?
Brain.
I miss the brains down in Africa.
So they didn't synchronize how quickly conveyor belts actually carry you, and they actually push you along faster than they move. What? Top-notch Mega Man style gameplay. It only cost me a cool $4 million.
Their words. Yeah. I was just gonna say, why don't you crank it up just a little bit so you can hear?
Siblings called the mighty numbers to boost competition. Always in the top ranks, they weren't dangerous. They probably shot blanks.
Yeah, this is one thing I don't agree with him on. He, for whatever reason, didn't care for Mega Ran doing a track during the credits.
No, he said this is a miscellaneous oddity.
Yeah.
He thinks it's odd, not that it's bad.
He had a bit more to say. He felt that doing that sort of geek hip hop it's something he didn't seem to be a fan of. I understand why it was done, because one, Mega Ran is great, and two, given the subject matter, why wouldn't you?
Well, maybe to him, at least he said it was. He doesn't really get into the hip hop, rather than it just being not something that should exist.
Mm-hmm. Fair.
He did express it was an opinion.
Jump! Holding! Barrier! 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 Barrier!
I'm getting flashbacks to I'm the girl with the gall.
Yeah. But played 17 hours more than the devs. Yeah. I've had the misfortune of encountering some developers who did not play their own games. I don't know why, unless you were forced not to, like the Lorraine Williams era of TSR, which I've talked about. But you should at least have testers, or at least be your own tester, especially if you're a small studio.
Yep.
Like, do not underestimate the power of good QA.
Ugh.
That's a thing.
God. There's plenty more to discuss and analyze in Mighty Number 9, but these highlights represent some of the worst offenders of bad game design I've ever seen. Gameplay that is consistently trial and error, off-screen or untelegraphed instant deaths, and completely nonsensical enemy placement all create this nagging thought in the back of your head. Perhaps this game would really rather be left alone. And yeah, you'd be right about that. This game is already the deformed black sheep of the Mega Man formula. Maybe it's time we just let it die in peace.
Says the person digging it up for a YouTube video.
YouTube videos. It was an entire
Duck dashing,
series.
duck dashing, duck dashing, duck dashing, duck dashing, duck dash, duck, duck. It's really fun to say. It's hard to believe that we finally closed the book on Mighty Number 9. This has been a long time coming, and we're definitely looking forward to tackling some new subjects in game design. We already have some plans and lots of great ideas, so
That's pretty much the end of it. And one might ask the question, why did I dig up an old ass video to do this kind of discussion? The big reason I did it is that while a lot of people have talked about how bad the mechanics were in the game, I don't think a lot of detail was or a lot of hate was given to just how bad it was.
I mean, when it came out, there were plenty of people, including other YouTubers, just showing how bad it was. It was an entire cultural niche during the time of its release.
But I would, even as bad as it is, I still think that people should watch, if not play the game, just watch walkthroughs, because I do think that this should be a study material for the future in what not to do.
Yes.
Much in the same way that that I've used the unholy trinity of RPGs as what not to do in that kind of design.
Yes. Now, I'd like to come forward with a little bit more. A lot of people think of this as Inafune's final part of his legacy. I don't think it should be. I think that, yes, Mighty Number 9 was a huge stumble for him. Very big. But please keep in mind that he, even after he went to, created Concept, he did a lot of things that were really good, even if they were underrated, such as the Soul Sacrifice games.
Mm-hmm.
He's been an executive producer and action supervisor on all of the Azure Striker Gunvolt games. And he's even assisted with the new Fantasy Life I, The Girl Who Steals Time sequel on the Switch. He is still making good games. He's still helping make good games, especially since Concept was bought up by Level 5. And because of that, I think what he's done is he's learned. He needs the help, and that's probably why he sold to Level 5 back in 2017.
Because he realized that this whole thing of doing it on his own, he's not capable.
It's more like he knows his limitations, and that unlike Igarashi, unlike Iga there, he may not be able to pick out the best people to work with, and so working instead with a studio who already knows the best people and also knows how best to apply his expertise may be the best role for him. And let's be honest, when he is doing his expertise, the games that he oversees are magnificent.
Perhaps this was a case of Icarus flying too close to the sun.
Oh, it definitely was. Let's not forget what I mentioned earlier. Before the game even came out, there was side material that was being announced and produced that no one asked for.
Yes.
And that was why I wanted to make that contrast with Bloodstained. Not just because one of them is a properly designed game and the other is less so, but also one of them, the project was solely dedicated to making a game. Inafune, I think he wanted to try and make a new franchise more than he was trying to make a game. And that was the big mistake.
Yeah, there was definitely an intention of, I'm going to build this into another multimedia thing just like Mega Man was. He wasn't resting on his laurels. He was actively trying to pursue what he had done before and not realizing how much more work went into it, because previously he was under Capcom at that time. Capcom put him in places he could be the most effective. And originally, remember, like we pointed out, he didn't like being called the father of Mega Man because it wasn't just him. I personally think that part of the reason he became so single-minded about it is because the fans kept insisting, "You're the father of Mega Man."
Well, earlier I brought up what happened with film in the 1970s, and one of the cultural changes that happened, and it's one that is still being felt to this day, is the shift towards the director as the sole creative force, the sole creative voice on a project. What I've referred to as that guy. And even if there is a collaborative project, at the end of the day, you do kind of need somebody to be that guy.
Yeah. No, I
don't think I need to go into what I mean by that guy, do I?
You might. We have quite a few new people since he came in.
So, what I mean by that guy, and this is a colloquial because sometimes that guy is not a guy. This is the person who is the captain of the ship, the one who has the final word on anything regarding this project. And they're the ones who ultimately the direction falls onto. Even if you have a collaborative affair, somebody eventually has to have the final say. And the term I've used for it is that guy or the guy.
It's essentially the buck stops there, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And, that may be the case. Maybe the thing is, with him, he was taking on too many roles at Concept by itself. Like I said, it's very clear that when he's with a company, his talent can be more focused towards its best expertise. And he may need that sort of guidance. And I guarantee that with Iga, he chose people because they could give him guidance. And so what I think here is that what we saw in 2016 with Mighty Number 9 was Inafune coming to terms with the fact that he can't do it all. And realizing that, sure, while he may have had an influence on Mega Man, he was not Mega Man itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so he stopped and he started doing other stuff. And of course, with Level 5, he assisted with a lot of their bangers. And with, Azure Gunvolt or Azure Striker Gunvolt along with NT Creates. And showed that he still has the chops he's always had. He just needs to be able to focus it the right way.
Yeah. And focus is something we've talked about. Hell, there's one particular member of the temple who we've gotten on for a lack of focus with their own project.
Consistently, and he never listens.
Mm-mm. And we've seen it. There's a reason why the phrase scope creep is one, or some variation of it, is used in engineering.
Yeah. And that's not to say that Bloodstained didn't have scope creep. It absolutely did as they got more and more, stretch goals and more participation. But it was scope creep that was acceptable by the fans. And it was scope creep that they made up front very obvious that this is not going to happen immediately. This is going to be something that happens after we get the main game out. Things like the full-on Classic Mode and Classic Mode 2. Things like all of the alternate characters that we've gotten. Especially and the big thing there, all of these future updates, completely free with Bloodstained.
Mm-hmm.
Like, once you've bought Bloodstained, you get everything else. Except for Curse of the Moon, that's a separate game.
Yeah.
I got that with it because I kickstarted, but that's a different story.
But you contrast this with some of the other big crowd funds that were happening around that time, like the infamous Star Citizen, which I'm pretty sure I will be reaching retirement age by the time that thing hits 1.0. Fuck, I'll probably be dead by the time that hits 1.0.
Star Citizen is a scam. I don't give a fuck if people want to skirt around it or say, no, not really. I'm just going to say it. Star Citizen is a scam.
Yeah, I was neutral on the matter and was just gonna use Hanlon's razor on the matter, especially since the guy behind it is a notorious perfectionist.
Doesn't matter if he's a notorious perfectionist. Charging $50,000 for a single ship is fucking ludicrous.
Especially when you already got a crap ton of money as it was.
$300 million out of all of the kickstarting and subscriptions and stuff that they've used most of because they needed to, and then restarted the whole project. No, it's a fucking scam.
The fact that they were trying to use Crytek, which has its own problems and has never really supported MMO design.
Not to mention the fact that it's dated at this point.
And then switching over to Lumberyard, which doesn't have the best track record either. They really should have just used Unreal and be done with it. You'd have an easier time hiring people if you do that.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you when I decided to just give up on anything regarding Star Citizen. It was at one of the CitizenCon events, and they announced that they were going to be doing procedurally generated planets. And this was after No Man's Sky had promised a similar thing, and we saw how that turned out. And I was like, nobody asked for this. Nobody wanted this. They wanted something that was a spiritual successor to Wing Commander and Freelancer. That was the selling point. And you're doing this experimental stuff nobody's asked for. And I said, I'm out. If this is probably going to crash and burn, but I am not going to be in the blast radius.
I saw what was being promised in the Kickstarter. I was like, that's way too much, dude. You've overpromised. It's the same reason I didn't kickstart NMS. And I'm very happy I didn't kickstart NMS. And then somebody bought me NMS anonymously a few years ago. I was like, I'm never going to play this. Why'd you do this? They're like, but it got good. I'm like, I don't care. I'm never going to play it. And then I tried playing it, and, well, I only had like 14 hours in it, which lets you know that it didn't keep me. But that's not for lack of it having improved. It did improve.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't like the gameplay loop they had at that time. Now, apparently, there's an even new, fresher gameplay loop, and I might have to go back and try it and see if it actually appeals to me now.
Mm-hmm. All
Monk
right,
crash.
we're back. We're back. No panic. We're back. I was gonna... As you no doubt saw on the schedule, there's plenty of stuff that's going to be happening in the next few days, including revisiting some old friends and roasting some new friends, or not new friends, but roasting someone who's had this coming for months. So please look forward to that, as well as the return of GeekWatch next Sunday, which will happen just before I end up watching the replay for All In, because fuck no, I'm not watching the live show. Especially since for a friend of ours, he'd have to get up at 3 a.m. to watch the live show.
Which friend?
Mace.
Yeah.
You know, because it's in Wembley and he's in Australia.
Yeah.
So instead, we're watching the replay. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra, I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.
上洛な上年関税を5年関税を年々上新規